1 minute.
I know.
Oh, we're going on record. Yeah, we're going on record. One, two, three, four, five. Everyone is here, including Alderman Lee.
She's got a
For a minute there, I thought that's the solar.
soup kitchen board.
I'm gonna skip over
I
that.
talked to her.
Oh, you are?
Yeah, because
Okay.
Are we gonna go back to that after?
And I talked to Rick. Both of them say no.
But are we going?
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, they're on board. They want
Okay.
a change.
Okay, good.
So I feel better no matter what they try.
Yeah.
all right, everyone, it's 7 o'clock. We're gonna start the meeting.
Gavel.
A meeting of Planning and Economic Development Committee was held today, Tuesday, March 19th at 7 p.m. in the Automatic Chamber. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Alderman at Large Melbourne Moran Jr., Chairman.
Here.
Alderman at Large Ben Clemens.
Here.
Alderman Derek Tebow is here. Alderman Ernest Jetty.
Here.
Alderman Tyler Govea, Vice Chair.
Here.
We also have in attendance Alderman Patricia Klee, and also in attendance we have Matt Sullivan, Community Development Director, Tim Cummings, Administrative Services Director, and Liz Hannum, Economic Development Director.
Great. So without objection, I'm going to skip over the discussion on sober homes and move it to the next meeting, given the seriousness of the legislation that is here and the members of the public willing to speak on it. Any objection? Seeing none. Communications.
We have a communications from Director of Administrative Services, Tim Cummings. Communication is relative to R-24-032.
Point of order. We missed public comment.
Oh, it's at the end. Okay, I'm sorry.
She forgot to put it in.
My apologies. There is one joint meeting that changed the lineup where we moved public comment to the end. That didn't get changed on the template that I'm reading from. So before we move into communications, are there any members of the public wanting to speak tonight on legislation that we're discussing? Just come up and state your name and address for the record. And thank you, Alderman Clemens.
Good evening, everyone. Jen McCormick, Library Director. I live at 43 Lund Street. I'm here tonight because this committee is discussing the future of the Elm Street School building, which includes the Keefe Auditorium. And the auditorium itself would require significant renovation to be maintained as a performance space. And as you discuss the future of that parcel, and particularly the auditorium, just wanted to remind members of this committee of the significant needs of the library building to bring it up to code and make it a safe and accessible building that operates efficiently. As some of you will remember, in October of 2022, the library trustees undertook a technical assessment of the library building, and as a result of which it was estimated that the library needs renovations to the tune of $30 million, 16 to 20 of that just to bring the building up to code, replace windows, correct the failed flashing under the bricks that allows water infiltration, install sprinklers, and a new fire alarm system. As it stands now, there are areas of the building where we've had to remove shelving and seating because water infiltration has caused permanent damage. There is only one accessible restroom in the 60,000 square foot building. Every component of our HVAC system is beyond end of life, and the windows, that are almost as old as I am, are conducting heat outside the building instead of containing it. I'm especially worried that the members of this committee and the Board of Aldermen think of the library as a dusty building that holds a lot of books, when in fact, we are a busy community center. On a typical day, the library sees between 700 and 1,000 customers. So far in March, today's the 19th, we've already had 11,000 people enter the library building. Our meeting rooms are used by nearly 50 community groups and individuals. Our meeting rooms have been used by community groups more than 2,200 times in the first 2 quarters of this year. We are not a quiet building, We are a busy and vital community resource. And while I realize that this committee is not discussing the library building tonight, I hope that you
30
all
seconds.
will consider the needs of other vital city buildings as you discuss the future of the Keefe Auditorium and other potential projects. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else from the public willing to comment?
Hello, Alderman. Mark Lamondon, former Alderman, Representative, Ward 4, District 3. Not used to a timer. My 12 years here, we didn't have a timer, so I'll be as brief as possible. Talking about Elm Street School and the properties, being a resident of the area, and my concern is the history of this property. This was Nashua South Common. Our forefathers made a decision to build the high school on South Common. Had they decided to build at Greeley Park, this would be a totally different discussion. What I'm advocating for is, first, let's look at the city's needs today and tomorrow. And then what's left over, then let's look at housing or whatever's necessary for leasing or what have you. This area, the southern tree streets, are in dire need of green space, playgrounds, anything for the kids. There is none in the southern tree streets. And parking. I'm the one that put legislation through to allow overnight parking there until 7 in the morning when school's in session. It is very utilized. Those are two huge demands that is in need of this area of the city. What I'm advocating for, and I have spoken to some departments, public health will never expand. I spoke to Bobby Bagley. She could definitely use extra space and annex. City Hall, this building will never expand, a City Hall annex. In short, this is a key area where we could have a community center, a park. Spoke to Chief Rourke. Chief Rourke would love to have access to the basketball courts. So biddy basketball, PAL basketball. Some of the a couple classrooms, for example, could be something utilized for after-school programs, arts, gardening, even woodworking, small engine repair in the shops. When I was on the board, when we were developing the mill yard, Kathy Hirsch had the idea of incubator businesses. That was hugely successful. You could do some incubator businesses here as well. On the grounds, some kind of playground, skateboard park, soccer field, anything where the community can congregate and recreate with some green space. Because again, there are none in the tree streets. I think that's as fast as I could go through this.
30 seconds.
In short, just I'm advocating, let's look at our needs today and in the future. Keefe Auditorium is obviously a keeper. This is also a CDBG area, so we can use funds there as well to help, even a multi-year allocation, which we did on several other projects in the city when I chaired not just infrastructure, but human affairs. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members of the public?
Good evening. My name is Dennis Schneider. I have chaired the Auditorium Commission for the city for the last 25 years. So to say that I understand the needs and the wants of the Keefe Auditorium would be a vast understatement. I've also been a life member and member of Actors Singers since 1984. I have probably mounted more productions in that hall than any other person in its history. So I have a very simple message. The opportunity to have something like Keefe is unique. The city would not come out of the blue and say, gee, let's build the largest auditorium in the state, in Nashua, somewhere. That's not going to happen. Okay? If we tear it down, it's never coming back. We've already lost potentially the symphony. It's a 1923 established in that building performance group in 36. So I would say there's a bunch of lost opportunities. Those lost opportunities are a rather small piece of the puzzle. The bigger piece of the puzzle is, do we want to have another performance space, potentially in some other surrounding with arts groups or whatever, or do we want to just bulldoze it all and have housing and never have things that I see Manchester having? So I look at the Palace Theater. It seats 880 people, and they recently expanded to a smaller theater. all on the basis of bringing acts every weekend into Manchester. They now do 500 performances a year. I look at the Center for the Arts in Concord, which was built on, basically by the city. It has 2 performance spaces. It also brings in hundreds of performances every year. Those performances bring vitality to their city. Manchester, that downtown area is jumping. They got the Verizon, the SNU, whatever they're calling it this week. But at the end of the day, this is a unique opportunity. And so the only thing I would say is in my view, there is a way to pay for it, and that's by making sure that groups, not just local groups, get booked into it. It's big enough to house the smaller Broadway tours. It's smaller than the Lowell Auditorium and bigger than anything you can go to the north for. It's a unique opportunity, and I just ask you that you, as you think about it, give proper weight to the idea. If we decide to bulldoze it, it will never return. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members of the public? Seeing none. Communications.
We have communications from Tim Cummings, Director of Administrative Services, regarding communication relative to R-24-032, supporting issuance for the sale of the Elm Street Middle School property.
There being no objection, I'll accept the communication and place it on file. Petitions?
None?
Unfinished business?
There is none.
New business resolutions?
I'd like to make a motion for R-24-032, supporting the issuance of a request for proposals relative to the sale of the Elm Street Middle School property, and I'd like to make a motion for final passage.
All right. That motion's in order. Director Cummings, Director Sullivan, Director Hannum, would you like to come up and discuss it? I'm not sure if all those directors are involved, but since you're here. They just threw you to the wolves, so right.
We're available. No, they can come up, yeah, come on up. The more the merrier.
Larger
They're
targets.
not jumping at you.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, and through you to the committee. My name is Tim Cummings, for the record, Director of Administrative Services. And I welcome the opportunity to come before you this evening to discuss R-2432. And I want to take a moment and thank my colleagues, Director Sullivan and Director Hannum, for also coming out this evening for this discussion. And so relative to R-2432, this resolution is essentially something that I thought would be good to use to tease out a conversation with you all about what it is that you want to do with the Elm Street Middle School. And so it's written in a way to say that, we're looking for the Board of Aldermen to support the issuance of an RFP. And then complementing this legislation is a communication that I wrote that I believe was submitted to the full Board of Aldermen and then referred on to the PUDC committee that goes into a little bit more detail about how I was conceptualizing the process and how I thought we could potentially advance and move this conversation along. This is not a new conversation. This is something that the city of Nashua has been well aware of for at least a couple of years now. Very early on, when the school district had announced that they were going to construct a new middle school, it was known at that time that the Elm Street Middle School was going to be turned back over to the city of Nashua's general government. And so that begged the question, what are we going to do with this 9 acres of land? And how would you all like to see this 9 acres get put back into productive use, and what goals you'd like to accomplish? So from there, we set aside some planning money, and we studied for over a year with some consultants how best to use the land. And we did a lot of community engagement. I'll go as far as to say extensive community engagement to tease out as best we could what we thought would be acceptable not only to the Board of Aldermen, but also to the general public at large. And ultimately, where they landed, and some of the questions and comments that were made this evening were vetted out. Without question, there was the idea of transitioning the Elm Street Middle School back into a common park area. It became clear through that process that that wasn't necessarily a priority that reached a level of consensus that folks wanted to support. Not when you juxtapose that with the need for housing. And what we heard clearly was the demand for housing, particularly what's referred to as mid-rise housing here in the city. We looked at our own internal needs, and we thought about whether we could look at the Elm Street Middle School in a way that could help us with our internal needs. Ultimately, the consensus was, no, this isn't a good fit. Not every empty building will work for your business needs. It's the same reason and same rationale that the schools went through when they said, should we just renovate this existing middle school or should we build a new middle school? And because of the current needs and business plan and operations of how education is provided today, they ultimately elected to build a new middle school. Similarly, we understand that, that building wouldn't necessarily fit and meet our needs. Again, when you compare it to what we know we need so much of, and what we've heard the community say that they're interested in, which is housing. So ultimately, what was arrived at was essentially a plan that called for housing on the site at what we refer to as a mid-rise level. That came from, again, community input, where that was the right level of tolerance. Ultimately, we don't know what we will get on the site. We will issue an RFP, and we will see what the private sector is willing to undertake, what the demand actually is, and we will then have to make a decision as to whether that's a development plan that we are in agreement with. Ultimately, the fundamental question is, and really what I'm trying to do this evening is to not get hung up on the process, but to continue moving this process forward. We have to have this conversation. The building is going to be turned back to us this summer, June or July, and it's going to go dark, and it needs a plan. And so I'm hoping we can have a conversation about whether you want to preserve the keef or whether you don't want to preserve the keef. Ultimately, it is going to be, it's going to dictate the relative development plan you get. You will get less housing, less development on the site. If you think of the site as 4 quadrants, basically what you'd be saying is we're going to be reserving one of the 4 quadrants. So only 3 quadrants would be available for development. And so you wouldn't necessarily see as many units on the site if the election is made to preserve the keep. Mr. Chairman, I'll leave my comments there other than just wanting to add one really fine point, which is separate and apart from what you elect to do with the 9 acres. We have a very real and serious capital funding initiative, a desire, and we have a lot of needs, and we don't have necessarily enough of the resources. And we have set out what I believe to be is around a $30 million year-over-year authorization of new debt as what I believe will be ultimately a policy directive and guidance that will be provided that I think is, agreed to. And more than anything else, I need this body to stay committed to that logic, to that policy directive, and see how best we may be able to fit whatever projects we may within $30 million year over year, or if you want to look at it over 5 years, $120 million. That is, and staff over time will be able to best tell you what projects we can slot in where as we move on, but really making sure that there's an understanding that if you do more than $30 million of new debt authorization, there will be a substantial impact on your tax rate. And staff here can't give you both. We can't keep the taxes low and also put new debt service onto the taxpayers. And so that is that's very real, that's a reality. And so please keep that in the back of your mind as you're continuing to make these various assessments. But ultimately, the communication that is before you, which, Mr. Chairman, I don't know if you want me to kind of go through and summarize, I'm not sure if folks have had a chance to read it, outlines the process that I've proposed, and it's a tried and true process in the sense that it's what we did with the School Street RFP. I literally followed the exact same format that I had outlined back in whatever it was, 2016. But that is essentially what I'm proposing again, and I'm asking for your favorable consideration of R2432. Thank you.
Alderman Clemmons, then Alderman Tebow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I actually have a couple of amendments that to the resolution that I would like us to consider, and I printed out the language ahead of time. So if I may, could I
Without
pass
objection,
these,
yes.
Could I pass these out and maybe put one on the record?
Without objection, I'll accept it.
And Mr. Chairman, as Alderman Clemmons does that, I just wanted to kind of highlight two other points, if
Yes,
I may.
please.
So, just for the record, I want to make sure folks know that my thought process in writing this communication it didn't necessarily go into as fine a detail on every single element. I was more just trying to conceptualize a process and communicate it all to you, because I knew eventually we were going to have this conversation. This is a very dynamic conversation where I expect there'll be some back and forth. But one of the things that didn't make it into the communication that I don't want anyone to think we're neglecting or we haven't thought of, and that's relative to what I believe in the RFP will ultimately be some sort of expression of interest in seeing some level of affordability on the 9 acres. That was a previous communication that we had with the Board of Aldermen where there was a clear sentiment expressed where we not only meet but look to exceed our ordinance relative to inclusionary housing. So again, Mr. Chairman, this communication did not go into any painstaking detail. Moreover, it was a synopsis or communication piece to conceptualize how I was envisioning the next few steps would be. But I wanted to put on the record that I also thought that we would have an affordability component as part of the 9 acres. We would make that expressly clear in the RFP, and we would go as far as to say we're looking to have units that would have vouchers associated to them. So you're looking at a medium income of between 50 and 60% of AMI. That is, I make that fine point because that is probably more than the 80% of AMI that our ordinance requires. But again, hearing conversations from previous meetings on this subject, I know that that was something that the Board of Aldermen expressed a desire with. So with that same mindset, I was hoping to have a conversation with you all about the KEEF and what the pleasure of the body may be. But again, Mr. Chairman, do you want me to quickly go through this, or do you want me to just leave my comments there?
Let's see.
Should he read the amendment?
Yeah, maybe we should start on the amendment, Alderman Clemmons.
Yeah, so along the lines of what was just said, my first amendment, so I'm going to make a motion to amend, and this would be after the paragraph that says now therefore be it resolved. So we would add, as what's written in front of you, it says amendment number 1, further resolved that any proposal shall include a portion of units for residents that have federally funded housing vouchers. And so that is my amendment, and I'd like to speak to that just briefly.
That amendment is in order, Alderman Clemmons.
Thank you. So that, I think, falls in line with what the director just said. It just makes it more clear that it is something that the Board of Aldermen wants to be included, and I think it makes sense to put that in the resolution.
And thank you, Alderman Clemmons, for bringing that forward, because I absolutely would have done that. For a little history, I made a bit of a issue of this a couple months ago about trying to make sure that we have mixed rate housing versus segregated income housing. And I, as you can tell, the city administration has heard that loud and clear, and I appreciate my colleague for making this amendment. Any discussion on this amendment? Alderman Galea.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a good amendment here. I think this should be a very focal point of any development we do on this property. Should be about the type of residential housing we put on there, and I think affordability should be right at the top of that list. I think this, to me, is the whole point of the project. Should be focused around what this amendment does. Thank you.
All right, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? All right, Alderman Clemmons.
Thank you. So, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, my second amendment is pertaining to the Keefe Auditorium, and it's very involved. So, I'd like to, if I could, even though we have it in front of us, for the sake of those on TV and the public, I'd like to read it and then.
Absolutely, take all the time you need.
Thank you. So, I make a motion to further amend after what we just inserted, that the resolution read, further resolved that any proposal shall incorporate the Keefe Auditorium to remain in any redevelopment plan, as the city intends to keep this important asset for both civic and community uses, as well as professional acts and performances into the future. Further resolved that as a part of the redevelopment plan for the Elm Street parcel, that the request for proposals shall not seek nor accept any proposals including the demolition of the Keefe Auditorium. Further resolved that the city of Nashua shall continue to allow community and civic groups to utilize the Keefe Auditorium until such a time as any redevelopment shall interfere with the safe access of the auditorium. And further resolved that it is the goal of the city to develop a plan to mitigate any costs, including debt service payments on any related bond associated with maintaining and upgrading the Keefe Auditorium, using similar methods used to mitigate costs associated with the Nashua Performing Arts Center, including but not limited to a tax increment financing district encompassing the Elm Street redevelopment site, grant funding, federal funding, a capital campaign, tax credits, and a professional management agreement.
Would you like to speak to that motion, Alderman Clemmons?
I would. So, I believe, as one of the speakers so eloquently stated, that we have an asset here in Nashua, and that is the Keefe Auditorium. If we move forward if we go out and we ask for proposals that both request the demolition of the property as well as keep it, I think that we will see a lot of proposals that risk destroying it, because I think it's common sense that working with a blank slate is easier than working with something that is already there. And so I can imagine that as a developer, if given the choice, I'm going to take the easy road. I think by putting this into the resolution, my amendment into the resolution, it makes a clear statement that we want to preserve the Keefe, that we want to find alternative means of funding such a proposal. And hopefully, what it will find is a developer out there who's willing to work with us and get that done. We've heard from, there was an architect in here, and I don't recall the firm's name or the date, but I do remember talking with them about different proposals to keep the Keefe. One of them was keeping even the rest of the building, I think, in some level, and converting that to housing. So it's possible. I've talked with, and I don't want to speak for him, but I talked with Director Cummings in regards to some of these ideas, and they're feasible in the sense that we could potentially cover the cost of some of the renovations of the Keefe with just the development on the site, not the whole thing, but a lot of it. Potentially most of what we need to keep the building at least standing. That would have to be vetted out, obviously. So what I think the city is looking for is a clear direction from the Board of Aldermen, clear direction from this committee. I don't think that it's any more clear. And in my opinion, I have heard from many in the community who feel that the Keefe Auditorium is an important part of Nashua and that they don't want to let it go. And so I am advocating that we pass my amendment this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Clemmons, and I'm gonna, before I take questions from Alderman, I'm gonna ask the position of the city administration on
Yep.
this amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So couple points and some facts and details that you all need to be aware of before you make such an election, depending on whatever you want to do with the amendment as offered. So first and foremost, in some of the due diligence we've been doing, and to make sure we understood the potential costs, and I'm only going to talk about the capital costs right now. It has been made clear by the fire department in particular that if you wanted to elect to move forward with what is proposed in like option number 2, as described, as soon as the development community decides to move forward with the redevelopment and the mechanicals of this building at the site which support the Keefe Auditorium are not usable, the city will have an obligation to spend about $10 million. And that $10 million would be just to keep the building mothballed. And so what do I mean by mothballed? We will have to run water, and we would have to run electricity and be able to service the HVAC equipment and the fire protection equipment to maintain the fire suppression in the building, which, if we move forward, could not be achieved once the rest of the structure gets torn down. So if you move in the direction of wanting to preserve the Keefe, we will have an affirmative obligation, and it would be an obligation to do sooner rather than later. And when I say sooner rather than later, you're within a 5-year horizon of spending at least $10 million. And so that's just for folks to be aware of on that front. I see Alderman Clemmons has his hand up.
Question? Alderman Clemmons?
Yes, and correct me if I'm wrong, Director Cummings, but through you to Director Cummings, isn't it true, though, however, that if there was a TIF district on that while we would have to maintain that, while we would have to spend that $10 million, we could potentially recoup a lot of, not all of, but a lot of that $10 million. And in addition to that, depending on how many units were on that site, we could also even potentially have enough to add restrooms, maybe, and a small lobby as well, in addition to the HVAC that you said for somewhere around $12 million.
I believe that to be accurate. I wouldn't want to be held to any numbers per se this evening, but I believe you could, through a TIF, support renovations to the Keefe. To what extent and to what dollar amount, you would still need to be studied further. But yes, you could absolutely elect to go in that direction. What you need to know if you do that, though, is you're taking all the future tax dollars that may go to the general fund, and you're basically segregating it and saying you want to use it for this specific purpose, which everything discussed here would be eligible from a statutory standpoint.
And right before I get to Alderman Clemmons, I just want to remind the public, this wouldn't happen tomorrow, right? You would have to get someone who would want the property, submit the RFP, what the plan was, and then when they're ready to demolish it, we would have to be prepared to spend the money. So it would happen over what kind of time frame would you?
I mean, it's a couple of years, to answer your question, just as simply as possible. It's definitely not happening tomorrow. It wouldn't happen in the next 6 months. You'd have to issue the RFP. You have to negotiate the contract. They would have to develop a design. Mm-hmm. That takes time. Some of all that runs concurrently. And then you would have a point in time when you would need to knock the structure down. And at that time, I believe the city of Nashua would have to be aware of the potential that we would have to spend approximately $10 million on just preserving the building from a a public safety standpoint, then you could look at do some of the other items that were discussed, bathrooms, lobby, green room space, whatever it may be, if you so desired. And that would need to be, again, that would have to be, a further discussion, and that may take a little more money, but you could absolutely look towards that. But you brought up 2 points that I think need some additional detail and discussion on. First and foremost is the plan to develop the Keefe Auditorium. I don't want that to be looked at as something that I could do. And it's written as saying the city, so I want to be clear that the city being defined as the Board of Aldermen, volunteer committees, whomever it may be, but I don't want the pressure, nor do I want the political lens on me as building another performing arts center in the city of Nashville. Like, I've been there, done that. I think.
And you did a good job.
So I think that has to be recognized and understood, that you're defining city as whomever it may be, Board of Aldermen, some volunteers that will put a plan together that would absolutely accomplish the vision and the goal that you're looking for. And that's something that I want to discuss this evening to make sure that we're all on the same page on that. But then the second thing is the operational costs. So a moment ago I talked about the capital costs. Relative to the operational costs, no matter whether we use or don't use the building, and I'm going to tell you right now, my recommendation is that you don't use the building. I understand that might not be a popular opinion, and I understand, and I will respect whatever decision that this body may go. But ultimately, if you do use the building, you're going to be looking at some increased costs as opposed to just what the cost would be to maintain the Keefe and the building as is while we're in this period of time of trying to get a development on the site. So rough numbers, we're looking at $200,000, $225,000, just to kind of leave it as is. While we go through that phase, and we're looking at around $300,000, $325,000, if we were to allow people to use it. That would bring about additional custodial costs. That would bring about a more intense usification of the utilities, whatever the case may be. And so folks need to be aware of that additional costs and be willing to.
Sorry to cut you off. If we turn that over to a company like Spectacle, they would require that the Keefe be brought up to whatever code to actually have performances there. Would that be correct in saying that?
More than code, and to
whatever the requirement would be.
To be market functional.
There you go.
So to be market functional, any operator is going to require that the city or whatever ownership put the capital money into bringing it up to a certain level. Mm-hmm. And that would be an expectation that would be provided, very similar to the Performing Arts Center that we just did on Main Street, because they would not be able to support the debt necessary. Now, could you explore a conversation where some money gets raised from the operations and put back into? Yes, but that'd be very de minimis, and that would all have to be part of a plan that gets worked out as you're working through the business plan. I would not want people to walk away from this conversation thinking that that a private operator could successfully run the site and also pay, for this conversation, a $15 to $30 million, whatever it may be, loan, because that wouldn't work for them.
Back to Alderman Clemens and Alderman Govea.
Thank you. So, a couple of points that I just want to make. We have a committee in place, I think, that could do a lot of the associated work. We have a couple of committees. One is the Keefe Auditorium Commission, which we heard the chairman tonight speak, and I'm sure that they would be happy to work on behalf of whatever needs to be done to keep that building up. And secondly, the Arts Commission as well. And I'm sure that those two work hand in hand. So the other point that I wanted to make was that while the operating costs, I actually have a question about the operating costs, because the operating cost of just keeping the Keefe Auditorium open, per se, while this study is going on, isn't it true now that what is the cost that the school district pays for the Elm Street building to be open?
Around $2-ish to $300,000. I mean,
So, but
yeah.
is that the whole school?
That's the whole school. Well, that's the Elm Street Middle School's utility expenses. I would say
Right.
Could generate anywhere between $200,000 to $300,000.
Alderman Clemens.
So my only point to that is, if we're using just the Keefe, right, the rest of the school would not be in use at the time. So that cost is going to be considerably less. And we're already spending that money now. It's just in the school district's budget. So that would be transferred over to the city, and the city would take that on. Now, you could argue that, well, you'd have to cut the school district's budget. And I would argue, well, that would be a fair thing to do. I'm not on the budget committee. But if we're keeping that open and that's an associated cost that they no longer have, fair enough. But the reality is that cost is going to be transferred over to the McCarthy Middle School, right? So it is a cost that we're going to have to bear. But it's not going to be to the $300,000 range, because the school, the portion of the building that we would be using is just the auditorium and whatever the mechanicals are to keep that open. Maybe some lights in the hallway where the bathrooms are and things like that. The rest of the entire school is going to be closed. So while I appreciate that cost, I think that you have to remember that that is the cost of the entire school for the entire year while it's open, with children in it and all sorts of electricity being used for various things. It's just not good. I cannot imagine that it's going to be that expensive.
Fair point.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, so the numbers I gave you, and this was developed in consultation with the school department, show a reduced capacity on the usage of the utilities. And so if you were to use the building to the level that you're talking about, it would be more than the 300,000 that I'm talking about. This 300,000 anticipates a reduction of the utilities to bring it down to a level where we're keeping the heat at between 50-ish degrees, but only turning it up as necessary for if you were to use particularly the Keefe Auditorium. And so the utilities are not being carried under the usage of the Keefe scenario at 100%. It's at more like 50 to 70%. And then if we don't use the Keefe at all, we're more at like 30% of utility usage. And so that is that's one differential that you need to be aware of. The other and the more finer point on it is, I want to make sure that there's a clear commitment that you're not going to move away from the idea of redeveloping this property, because I'm gonna digress for a moment, Mr. Chairman, and just share a quick anecdotal story from a previous community I've worked in, where this exact same scenario played out, and still to this day, 30 some odd years later, they have an empty middle school that is home to a few nonprofits, that is used on occasion for performances, is used as for basketball when the basketball rec league wants to play, and the city missed out on an opportunity to redevelop the site, and so. And I can see a lot of uses being potentially suggested for this site, for instance, of future housing and transition shelter, homeless encampment shelter on the grounds, nonprofit, PAL, GAD, you could continue the list of what this site may potentially do, that would then deviate and negate the potential redevelopment of the entire 9 acres. And so if you were to use the site in whatever capacity, I think there just needs to be a commitment and an honesty that it's temporary, and that folks who use it shouldn't get too comfortable and say, well, we're here, you can't kick us out now that we've been here for 2 or 3 years. And so that is my biggest concern as to why I think, if you open up Pandora's box or you rub the genie, you're not gonna put the genie back in the bottle. And I want to have that conversation so we're clear as to what the expectations of this community is.
And maybe we need to have that conversation, of course. My imagining of this is that keep would be used as like in a mixed-use housing area where that's an attraction, not so much a use of city or nonprofit or even a shelter using that space, but utilizing it as some kind of arts intersection with whatever housing is developed around it. Maybe be a draw with, I'm gonna make an amendment later on to focus on green space as well, but is that, am I off topic? Does that seem like, does anyone else want to use it as a shelter, I guess? Raise your hand. Is that what you're looking for? Do you want to?
I just think that inevitably the administration is going to be put in a very difficult position where very good-meaning folks are going to ask us to use the site for whatever it may be, and then when we say no, or we explain how it has to be temporary, whatever the decision may be, they will inevitably turn to you all. And we need to be clear that we're committed to the long-term vision. We need to be strategic. This is not about the next couple of years. This is what we want to do 10, 20, 50 years from now on this 9 acres. 9 acres that is in the downtown core that most communities don't get the opportunity to redevelop. So, take this opportunity, leverage it to your advantage so everyone wins.
Alderman Govea, I'm sorry, I've
no
neglected
worries.
you and Alderman Tito for so long, and you're up right after then Alderman
I
Tito.
just want to open up with a quick question. So that $10 million we talk about, does that get you to that market level that somebody like Spectacle would want?
No.
What dollar estimate ballpark would?
And this is debatable and it's been disputed, but I can report to you, $30 million is what you would need to spend to bring it up to a level of what I think would attract a private sector entity to want to operate it. And at that, it may be more, it may be less, but you're in that range.
All right. Follow up? Yes. In a July 14th, 22 memo to the Board of Aldermen, you stated through research that the auditorium is not used 75% of the time. Is that still accurate?
Not used 75%
Yeah.
of the time. And we gotta be fair here. That's because it was under the school's control.
Sure.
And I think because it was under the school's control, it wasn't as available. But to date, as I understand it, it gets used approximately 40 times. 40-ish times in a calendar year, whether that is rehearsals, whether that is shows, whether that's events, whatever it may be, it's used on average about 40% year over year. And with that being said, Alderman Govea, some of these groups have expressed an understanding that maybe they need to look at doing things differently, and because they recognize some of the issues at hand and the very real business issues. And so we've had passing conversations with some of these arts groups about, hey, maybe the city could temporarily help you transition to use the Nashua Center for the Arts. What does that look like? How can we get that, how to get you comfortable to do that? By no means any commitments have been given. By no means have there been a yes gotten to on that front. But we're looking to try to help assist, mitigate some of these issues, because I think some of it is the fear of the unknown. I think some of it is business plans and models that have worked for years for some of these nonprofits and users of the keep, would definitely need to be looked at, and we should help them recalibrate some of how they're doing things. You know, one of the things we know and we hear criticism on is there isn't fly space over at the Nashua Center for the Arts. And so understood, that was a concession made during the design, and some of the groups who use the Keefe Auditorium utilize that function. So would they have to conceive of their productions a little bit differently to be able to use the Nashua Center for the Arts? Yes. What the city's administration has represented is we'd be a willing partner to help them work through some of those problems, maybe put in the budget some assistance to do that for a few years to get them over a hump, because we recognize the challenges that they may have. We want to be good partners with them, but we're looking at it from a business perspective, or at least I need to look at it from a business perspective and say, is it worth us doing this vis-a-vis spending $30 million when we know we have all these other needs? It's not for me to decide, it's for you all. I just need to provide you the facts.
Follow up? Yes. So, I mean, that kind of says all it needs to say there. I'm all for assisting these programs and helping them in gap periods of time. I think that's fantastic and what we should do. I mean, if this was $10 million to get it to somewhere we could get somebody to operate this for us, more palatable. But if we're talking, they're not going to touch it until $30-ish million of renovations. That's a really hard sell on me. I really don't know if I can get on board with it. As far as the amendment goes, I can get on board with bits and pieces of it. As far as grant funding, federal funding, capital campaign tax credits, and a professional management agreement, I think that's spot on. You kind of lose me a little bit when we start talking about a TIF district for that area. We're going to be developing that area, and if we create a TIF and all that money's going to the Keefe, they're also going to need services from the city that is inevitably going to fall upon everybody else to make up that difference. I can't get on board with the amendment. I think it's too much, and we're opening a weird kind of situation where, to me at least, it's we got to either spend the $30 million or we got to do nothing. Keeping it at the $10 million range and just making it so it's a mothball kind of area, that doesn't do much for me. I think there's a much better use of space, and it's unfortunate to say. It's absolutely a hard conversation to have, but it's just, that's the way I'm looking at it right now, the money's just not there, and yeah, you're good.
Sorry.
Nope, you're good.
I was, Alderman Tebow.
Man, you're a downer. That's for sure.
So I've been told.
I would say just push it to Director Hannum to do if you don't want to do it. She's in your spot now, right? Let her do it. I got so much to say, and I don't even know where to begin, if I should save it for after we do the amendment, or if I should just say it now. But,
say it now.
You know, as far as the use of it, I just can't go by that, because we know the school's holding the use back. So we know it would go up. And obviously, if we spent the money, it would go up because it would be nicer. So I can't really go by the use part of that. I think that's not a good argument, just because the school's not allowing other people to go in there more than a certain amount of time during the school year. You know, the other piece of it may be that there are some things that aren't in there anymore. But you mentioned the fly space. It's also the well for the orchestra, right? There's no orchestra space at the Performing Arts Center. So that's one piece of it as well. You know, I look. You know, I think Representative Plamondon mentioned it. You know, it was South Common, you know, big green space, South Common. And the city decided in the early 1900s to build a high school there. Beautiful. I mean, I lived on Chestnut for a year and a half. Looking up at that school, I was right behind the fire station. It's beautiful. The new section, not so much, except for the basketball court, but it's beautiful. You know, it's huge. You get the green space in front of it. I mean, I would love to keep that historically. Now, to spend the kind of money, that's something that we're going to have to figure out. This is probably the biggest thing we're going to talk about in our new administration, is what to do with this property. Because it's a huge asset to the city, and it's a huge spend on what we're going to do and what we're going to try to figure out. I love the library. I go there at least once a week. I was there for the book sale, and I hated it because I couldn't move around, but they made a ton of money in the book sale, you know, I think it was over 30,000. So we just gotta sell more books. I'm kidding. But, you know, so I understand their needs, and I hate to see them get bumped down if this takes priority, because they need to fix that space too. And so the ad hoc committee that we got going on, you know, that's gotta be looked at. As far as like green space, I mean, we had that little park created behind the Crowley School, the Adult Education Center. I never see anybody in there. So that's the part, and maybe it's in a weird place, maybe it's hard to go to, but I drive by there 100 times a week. I never see anybody in that space. So, I mean, we did put some green space in there. Is it a soccer field? No. Is it a baseball field? No. You know, I hate to see the basketball court go, especially the newer one. It's beautiful. We ended its run last night with a big championship for the Bantam team, so go my team. And I would hate to lose that. I would love to see a rec center along with the Keefe, along with affordable housing, with a little bit of green space. And I know that would be impossible, because you're not gonna have, you know, developers that wanna do that, because they're not gonna make the money on it.
And if I may,
Yeah.
and part of the equation is, if you go under the Alderman Clemens scenario, is units of housing is going to drive what supports some of what you're looking to do. So the less units on site, the less money that would be in theory available for however you want to use it, and you need to just keep that in the back of your mind.
Yeah, and, you know, I do wanna keep whatever developer goes in there to still keep the spirit of the community. I mean, I don't want something weird going in there and it just breaks up that space, right? I mean, obviously it would be newer, nicer, you know, obviously not 100 years old, but I still want something to be in there that keeps that space. And like I said, this is gonna be the hardest decision we come up with, because, you know, Director Cummings has already taken himself out of it, so we're gonna have to figure this out. And you could go to the 90,000 people we have in the city, and you're gonna get different answers from every single one of them, right? We did some of this. I mean, we're gonna have aldermen that will not spend a dime to do anything there, and we're gonna have some that would, at all costs, but keep the Keefe. So we're gonna try to find somewhere in between where we can keep it and still not cost the taxpayers the money we're spending. And I'm not sure yet how to do that. I'm okay with the amendment as far as looking for that, but, you know, and my question will be in a second, you know, what do we do if we don't find a developer? Does it sit there for 10 years? But, you know, it's a struggle. I wanna keep the Keefe. I love the history of the building. It's a high school. My dad went to high school there. It's a beautiful building outside. Inside, it's showing its age. But, you know, the Keefe is still a viable building, and I think we can do something with it. So I would support the amendment, but we really gotta work hard at figuring out what fits to keep that and how we're gonna work it. You know, Alderman Clemens has some good thoughts here. You know, can we get like, I don't know, TD Bank to come in and give us like 30 million or something to put their name on the outside of the building? I would be more than happy to vote for that right now, right here. So my question is, so, you know, what if we go out there, we pass this, we're going out there to developers and said, this is what we want to do, and we don't get anything, pin drop? Because we're asking for a lot, right? We're asking to keep the Keefe, we're asking for affordable housing, you know, and we're asking for a lot of housing. So what if nobody comes back with any kind of proposal? We're out of luck and we gotta wait until somebody comes back with something that we want? Or can we change it? Can we then make another amendment to take this out of it? Like, what are our options here?
So you, I mean,
Director Cummings.
thank you, Mr. Chairman. So you always reserve the right. So you know, you can even get a proposal and opt not to proceed with it. What you do is predicated on private sector demand, though. And the business model for the private enterprise needs to work for that. And some developers are going to be more like-minded to affordable housing, and some developers are going to be more like-minded to new construction. And you're going to, you know, and part of the communication outlines, you know, an idea or a concept of developing a small working group, which I've suggested that 2 or 3 members of the Board of Aldermen, along with city administration, play a part of, to work through some of the development of this RFP. Because right now, we're talking about just overall guidance. And then ultimately, the selection of the preferred development that's, made to us. My goal always is to try to provide you with 3 to 5 options. You don't want to get more than that because that becomes unwieldy. You don't want to try to get less than 3. So success for me will be is if we issue an RFP, and I truly believe we will get 3 to 5 proposals, and then it will be evaluated, and a recommendation will ultimately come back to the Board of Aldermen. And then you can elect to proceed with one of the developments. I do believe that if we are to, and that's one of the reasons why we spent so much time studying the 9 acres, if we follow a process of mid-rise development, and we welcome new construction on the site, I believe you will see proposals, including proposals with an affordability component, that would satisfy the RFP as outlined.
Follow. So, so thank you. So I'm going to support it tonight to at least explore what we can do, because I do want to keep the Keefe. So, question, and can there be some mixed use in there? And I say that and oh boy, your head swung open. Mixed use, he goes nuts. We're not putting another vape shop there, Director Sullivan. So what I do want to see is maybe, could there be like a little market, like a Jeanette's market? There can't be that.
No.
Is that because there was a school there?
Mr. Chairman, can I speak to that?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm probably being a little cavalier when I say no.
Okay.
Because if you're willing to wait 20, 30 years, then yes, you might be able to see the market demand there. But I'm pretty sure that there's an available site at the corner of Lake and Main that's already kind of fitted out for maybe something kind of cool that's just kind of sitting there. And so that is going to need to get filled before you see anything happen further back from the main artery. And so I guess the question is are you willing to wait that long for the private sector market to catch up with your vision? And if you're willing to wait, then yes, you could have some sort of commercial uses there. But I would say if you're wanting to do something in the next 5 years, the only real answer is housing.
Okay. Thank you.
Alderman Jettie.
Thank you. So I have several questions. So I guess the first one is to the maker of the motion, the motion to amend. Is it your desire to keep the Keefe building as it is, or is it your desire to keep a theater that would be available to serve not only what Keefe has traditionally served, but hopefully more types of performances, more active performances, and I ask that question because, and I don't know if it's I don't know if what the answer might be, but it's one thing to renovate the Keefe building to a state where it would be usable by somebody like Spectacle. It's another thing, to put out an RFP to ask somebody, what would it cost to build a theater? I mean, the problem with the Keefe, has been that, it's an old building. It's not heated properly. It's not cooled. It doesn't have, bathroom facilities that the modern public is used to. It doesn't have, the facilities that go along with a successful theater. The space for the performers. Space for drinks and food and you know, the type of thing that people today expect when they go to a performance. So I don't know if it would cost more to renovate the existing building to make it such, or would it be, you know, less expensive to, you know, tear it down and build something new? So I guess I'd like
To the maker of the motion or to Director Cummings?
to both.
All right, who wants
To
to
the
go
maker of the
first?
motion first, and then to Director Cummings.
Director Cummings or Alderman Clemmons, go ahead.
Thank you. So no, so I don't think that well, let me qualify this. I would be in support of spending $30 million to renovate the Keefe. I'm telling you that right now. So, because I think it's an asset that would bring economic vitality to the city in ways that would complement the Performing Arts Center downtown, the Nashua Center for the Arts. So I would be in favor of that anyway. However, I don't think most of us here on the board would be in favor of doing that. And so as a compromise, it would be my thought to, I actually had a question, but I'm gonna just respond to your question first. But my thought would be to spend the money to get its own HVAC, to get it up to a level where it can be sustainable in and of itself without if we tore down the rest of the building, right? And then, as I had mentioned earlier, could there be an idea to get maybe bathrooms in a lobby of a small degree? And part of that is there are buildings that are directly behind the Keefe Auditorium that right now could potentially house the mechanicals as well as if you gutted them, could serve as a lobby, and maybe we could put bathroom facilities in there. I don't know if there might already be. So that's an idea, but I think that part of my amendment is you have to have the foresight to plan and look at this kind of thing if we're going to do it. So really, I think the second part of this would be to pass this as amended tonight, at least in my opinion, and then charge the Keefe Auditorium Commission with looking into what could we do, looking into if we're going to move forward with this, where could that mechanical be housed? Where could we do a small lobby and a small little entrance? How would that affect different things? And you charge that commission with basically saving their auditorium, right? And so I think that there's an opportunity here for us to be able to look at some of the questions that you pose, Alderman Jettie. I don't think they're going to be answered here tonight. So it's really a question of, it's really, no, I don't think that it would get the support of the Board of Aldermen, and I don't want to speak for everybody, but I don't think that it would get to a point where a professional company would use it right away. But I certainly think that we could potentially get it to a point where we have a usable facility, more so than it is now, and we have a commission that oversees it that works to get it to that point over a period of time. And so that would be my vision for this, so that's my intention.
Do you want the next answer, or you have a follow-up?
I guess I'd like an answer to my question, which is, do you want the old building, or do you know?
The old
If we were able to build a new building at less expense than renovating the old building, would you take the new building?
Well, okay, that's a good question. I mean, yeah, obviously, if we could build a brand-new theater for less than $30 million, I would do it, but I don't think you can.
Director Cummings.
Alderman Clemmons just said it. You will not be able to build a new building at the same seating level, because I think that's important to recognize, for less than $30 million. Our current Performing Arts Center, which we spent $25 million on, I was recently told by the architect who designed it, he just costed out a very similar venue in Fitchburg, Massachusetts, and it's upwards of like $35 to $40 million. And part of that was because we got in before the construction costs went up through COVID. So I would just suggest to you that that you would, if you wanted to build new construction, you would need to recognize the fact that it would be more than $30 million.
Alderman Jettie.
Okay, but wouldn't those additional construction costs apply to a renovation as well?
Director Cummings.
Yes, but you would have value already with an existing structure that you could reap some benefit of. I'm just talking out loud, but you don't need to
Yep, I
build a new
understand.
foundation.
Okay. And,
Alderman Jettie.
so, what happened to the ice rinks? Are those
No.
still on the table, or?
No one bid. Not a single person bid when we put it out for the RFP. I'm sorry, I happen to know the answers.
That's correct. We did, in good faith, put out an RFP and solicit a wide range of community, and we left it open for quite a considerable period of time, and ultimately there weren't any responses.
Okay, thank you. And,
Alderman Jettie.
so the problem I have with the amendment, I'm not against the idea of keeping the Keefe, but by taking by taking it off the table, by saying you've got to keep the Keefe, we're kind of limiting the proposals that an RFP would generate. And I may be wrong, but I have the impression that that numbers are being thrown around here, without their best guesses. And I thought by requesting RFPs, we would get concrete proposals that would say, this is what we can do, and this is what it's going to cost, or this is what the proposal would be. And I would I'm kind of reluctant to take things off the table that without having those concrete numbers. I mean, the fact that we ask for proposals that would include the demolition of Keefe doesn't mean that we would demolish it, or that we would not pursue that. But at least we'd have numbers and proposals, concrete proposals that we could consider. But by making a decision to take something off the table tonight, without those concrete proposals, makes me uncomfortable. I feel like we're not really doing our job. But I may be wrong if people want to correct me about that.
Can I speak to some of that?
Yes, Director
Mr.
Cummings.
Chairman? So we have provided you and the public with a lot more due diligence and study of this land area than typically gets done. And it was done to provide as much information as possible to help you make an informed decision. Lots of times what you need to do is look at this and say, you're not going to have concrete numbers. Even when you get a proposal, I can tell you right now, those numbers are going to be very fluid, and any good developer will tell you that. because until they start designing, they don't really know what they're going to be able to do, but they're making an educated guess. They're making an educated guess based on the market, they're making an educated guess based on their due diligence that they do, and they are trying to put a plan together that they believe is responsive to you. And so Alderman Jettie, you are absolutely correct. What we are trying to forecast for a developer very early on is to tease out the idea as to, do you want to do development on the quadrant that has the keef, or is the community expressing a value and a sentiment that, no, we want to hold that aside because we don't want a developer to potentially put housing units, and you're willing to live with that trade-off because you know the consequence of that decision is you're not going to get as many housing units on the site, on the in total 9 acres, and that's okay. And so you are correct when you say that there are numbers being tossed around, and maybe you need to have some more study to have confidence in those numbers. But the numbers we're using have been provided by professional consultants. They are at a level that most developers, or even more than developers, typically use when they're making assessments actually to proceed. I think a lot of developers will actually use what we've done to develop their plans. Part of the reason why we did that was to help both the public, the Board of Aldermen, and the development community have some idea of what could potentially be done on the site. And ultimately, until you start doing a level of design, you're not going to really know. And so whether that's designing the housing units, or you start to designing the keef, or whatever it may be, we're using the estimates provided to us by the professional consultants within the industry that are most knowledgeable, that can give you the information that they have to the best of their ability.
And to add to that, if on the RFP side, it's the group the city picks to basically score it. And if we don't have it written that we want the board's interest is to maintain it, that committee is just there to score it without really taking that into a factor and giving it the best score to the best proposal, which will most likely not.
And so, Mr. Chairman, you hit on a great point, and this is more of the economic developer in me. Part of the reason why we want to do this up front is because we don't want to get to a point with the private sector community where they've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars, and then we mislead them as to what it is that this community and this Board of Aldermen is willing to accept. And so that would be the worst thing that we could do.
And in my experience, and we'll see this later on when in front of the board, the NIMCO property, I may disagree with where we ended up on it, but I'm not going to try to derail it or anything like that because it would be so costly, not just to the developers, but also to the city. And they didn't know what we, at the time the RFP went out, they didn't know that that was part of what, me and some other aldermen might have been looking for. It wasn't fair. Sorry, Director.
If I could just put in 2 cents here, it does sound like a lot of people would like to keep the keef, but not everybody's willing to put the money into it. And what I would suggest here is maybe not mandating that we take the keef out, or take the demolition out of the proposal, but put specifically in the RFP that we are prioritizing proposals that would keep this. So that might be a good compromise between between not having proposals with the keef or with demo of the keef. So that might be a way to prioritize proposals that do keep the keef. Just a thought.
I'll look to the maker of the motion if that's something he wants to amend. Other than that, I'll move on to other.
Yeah, I do have further comments, but I know there's other people, and so I'd like to ask a couple more questions, but I'll let.
Alderman Clee.
Thank you. I'm not used to being quiet for this long. It's killing me. It's not, I think I'm breaking out in hives. And as a result, I have a lot of questions, a lot of comments. First, I want to be upfront here that I have sent a letter to our legislative body, our federal delegation, And in doing so, I spoke to the fact it's a WPA building. I spoke to the fact that it's named after Edmund M. Keefe, who was a 70-year resident of Nashua, 20-plus year teacher and superintendent of the Nashua school system. And when he retired, he didn't just walk away and say, okay, I'm now retired. He ran for state rep and held the seat for 8 terms. So demolition of this building also ruins his history. We lose that. And I know that, you know, it may not be worth $10 million, it may not be worth $30 million, but I think it's something that we need to hold on to. We lose so much history here. I remember when we were building the Performing Arts Center and people saying, well, you know, it had been this store and that store and we're losing this history. And we said, okay, so we kind of kept the 1930s building and just built more towards the front and so on. So we did make compromises to that. As far as like make it a prioritization, while I love the compromise and I believe in compromise as much as possible, my angst is that if we put out the proposals, what if we don't get one that keeps? And that's the potential that we have, that we will not get one because honestly, if I'm a developer and I have the choice of this beautiful 9-acre empty piece, I'm gonna build my development. I'm gonna take my little monopoly pieces and put it all over the place. If we give them the option of saying this and saying it's gonna be prioritized, I can't see a developer saying, well, this is with it and this is without it. We're not requiring them to do it, and we may never get an option on that. And then the Keefe is dead, conversation's over with, and that's that. So that's how I really feel it's gonna go. So if tonight you all decide against this amendment, you are saying goodbye to the Keefe. There's no doubt in my mind that that's exactly what would happen. So now I want to ask a question of Director Cummings, and you may not have this answer, so, and I'm not holding your feet to the fire if you do have the answer. You talked about that $200,000, $300,000 for keeping it if we keep the Keefe and we have to mothball the rest of the building or whatever it was you're doing. What I want to know right now is what is the school paying to maintain it operationally as an active building? Because that's the money that I think is going to be going to the McCarthy School, not just $200,000, $300,000. I want to know what the actual cost is. And I don't know what the cost of the McCarthy, none of us know what the cost of McCarthy is, but there's solar there and so on to lower the cost of that. So is the entire cost of what is costing the Keefe now honestly going to be developed? Trust me, the school department is not going to give 1 penny back. They're going to hand us the building and say, you take care of it, it's all yours now. And by the way, we need that money for whatever it is that they need that money. They're not going to lower their budget. I already had many conversations about giving up Mount Pleasant, them giving up Mount Pleasant and saying, well, we're going to save the school this much money. We're not going to save the school that much money. You may save the school department, but we're not saving the taxpayers that much money, and we have to get that out on the table. So having said that, Director Cummings, do you know what the current operating cost is?
Yeah, so again, don't hold me to the exact details.
And I don't.
I'm going to give you an order of magnitude. The utility costs alone for this year are between $300,000 and $350,000 for the Elm Street Middle School. A lot of what I would say are other associated expenses are actually, as I understand it, done quote-unquote in-house by the school department, which we do not have the same level of service that we can provide. So some of that, we'll need to pick up on our side and outsource. But nonetheless, if we just keep it very narrowly to the utility costs, we're looking at just right now, the building being used as a school, it's about $300,000 to $350,000.
Okay, so now may I continue?
Yes,
thank you. So having that number, you still think that if we just used the Keefe and we allowed the other one, that we would be looking at a $300,000 bill? That's what you've said. You said 200 to 300, but probably 300.
So 200,000 would be just if we were to maintain it and not let anyone use it. Around 325 is what I think would be the additional cost if we would allow people to use it. And I would suggest, and this is something that we need to talk through, now that we're letting people use it, are we letting them use the gyms? I'm gonna say that my thought is the answer will be yes. So, and that's fine. I'm just saying we will need to plan for those associated expenses. It's not just usage of the Keith.
Okay, so what you're saying is that 320,000 would be if we use the Keith and potentially use some of the gyms and so on. So that 320 isn't just for the Keith. And I'm not saying that we wouldn't use the gym, but I wanted to keep the conversation to the Keith. And the reason why I'm trying to keep the conversation to that is because that's kind of what this is talking to. But I can live with the 320.
And I want
yes.
to, and that is with a usage of 60-ish events a year, as opposed to the 40.
Right.
We're upping it a little bit, thinking folks may want to use, now that it's not under the school's control, we're thinking that it would get used more in fairness. And so it'd be more available, and so you have the 40-ish where and then we're plugging in, and whether that's some gym usage or whether that's some additional Keefe Auditorium usage, we're guessing and we're suggesting, about 40 events would happen at the site. And I think that's a fair number to use because we don't have any trends to back it up right now.
May I continue?
Yes.
And
then
before
I'll-
before I do really continue, I want to commend Director Cummings, Director Sullivan, and now that Director Hannum is on board too. They did do the due diligence of speaking to the public and having different ideas and putting up poster boards and telling people, what do you want, what do you don't want, and so on. So I want that to be clear that they have done that work. But even putting all that aside, I'm still very, very strongly in favor of that. I speak to people from the arts community, and I want to put something out there. The original Duncan Webb study, from what I've been told, that basically outlined that to have the Keith, which was not talked about being demolished when we were talking about the Performing Arts Center, but to have a successful Performing Arts Center as we wanted, basically to the highest point, it meant that we had to have the three, I call it the triad. We had to have Court Street, we had to have Keith, and then we would have the National Center for the Arts, back then called the Performing Arts Center. To eliminate that kind of goes against what the Duncan Webb study had said. So I don't know whether or not it truly would, because we have a phenomenal management person in Spectacle at the Performing Arts Center that I think is doing a phenomenal job. But I also think that the arts dollars that come into the city, the American, I know I'm going to get this wrong, but the American Arts Commission, I think it's called, basically talked about the number of dollars that come into the city for every dollar that comes in through the arts. Or we basically are spending like $1.50 or $1.25. So the arts brings in money. I think if we're able to have this for 12 months out of the year, rather than just a few months that we're doing it now, it would expand. I think concessions would expand, because right now no alcohol is allowed because it's part of a school. So we'd be looking at a whole different structure than we're looking at now. I also want to bring up, if I can continue with my diatribe.
And I just want to apologize to the public. I'm trying to fix a computer issue.
Oh, I thought you were going to apologize for me talking.
Yeah, if anyone was wondering why I'm ripping a keyboard out of Director Cummings.
I thought you were going to apologize for my going on, so it's like, I already did that. But I remember, not necessarily when the Palace first opened, but I remember going to the Palace and sitting in those seats that were torn, that were too small, that were too this, and it has grown. Granted, it's a nonprofit, but it has grown to the point where the seats are a little wider. They actually took out seats to make them wider. They finally painted things that were but they didn't do it all at once. They did little bits and pieces as time went on, so it wasn't an all or nothing thing. And they've made a success out of it. We're seeing more arts places opening up and so on. And so I don't want to, while I love the idea of compromise, I don't want to put the Keefe as a potential demolition, because I think all in all, it will be demolished. I would not personally be in favor of a new building, and the reason for it is, I don't think we could build it as large as it is. It is the largest seated auditorium in the state. There's nothing bigger as far as being able to hold that. And I think that we could grow as far as shows and so on. So let me just look at my notes here because I was writing so much there. But I mean, the bottom line is we need to do everything we can. Maybe in 2 years, or maybe even a year, or maybe 6 months, we will get 0 proposals by keeping the Keith there. Then we're gonna have to come back here and potentially amend this again and say, put it back on the table, we're gonna have to do what we're gonna have to do. But I don't wanna start out that way. I just don't wanna start out that way, and I hope that you will support the amendment as written, so thank you.
Alderman Clements. Thank you, Alderman Clee. I appreciate your words.
Thank you. So I'm going to ask my first question. So I know we're having some computer issues, but one of the 3 options that we originally showed were, the first one was the Keefe with the front, I call it the front building, or the main building, right, without anything in the back. That, if that was the alternative, okay, the mechanical for the Keefe Auditorium is in that building, is that correct?
As I understand, it's in the historical structure at like the other end of the building.
Okay, so if that building was to be part of the renovation, okay, where the Keefe was the Keefe, and then that was renovated, and they made it into housing. And then on the other portions, they demolished it and put other buildings. Obviously, there would be less housing there altogether. However, you would add the green, essentially you would add the green space in the front because you would assume that it would stay. Maybe some of it would be taken away. Secondly, I imagine, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the costs associated with keeping the Keefe would be less. Is that true?
That last part, Alderman Clemens, I don't know about. I would not suggest that it would be less. But I would also caution you under that prevailing thought that that will be the hardest type of proposal to get a response from the private sector community. I think you'd be, as you pointed out, limiting yourself with the amount of units, so there's a trade-off there. I think you would find, you would have to find a very community-oriented developer who would want to take on the project and the challenges to then also mix the business models of having a live venue right beside people who are trying to sleep at night. And so, again, through the due diligence and the study that we've had, it has been expressed to us that, you know, you don't typically see business models where the 2 buildings would still be attached. So, you know, that's just something that folks would need to be aware of, you know, and you know, plan accordingly, I guess.
So that, okay, so that answers my question, because I pretty much was under that same impression, and I was wondering more of an answer as to why that wasn't more a discussed option, so that makes sense to me. In regards to, you know, kind of putting a compromise language in here, I for the same reasons that Alderman Klee mentioned, the purpose for this is to provide clarity, and is to provide a straightforward vision for what we want a developer to come in and propose to us. So I think it is very important to put in a proposal that says these are our intentions, this is what we want to do. And in my opinion, what we should be doing is keeping the Keefe Auditorium. So that I think provides direction, and I think it provides a very clear understanding of what it is that, that we want. And I think to the point that, to some of the points that were made, there's a lot of work that needs to be done, that can be done on the side to make sure that this is viable. The other thing is just because a request for proposal comes in and we do it this way, and they say, okay, we'll build X amount of houses around the Keefe Auditorium, if we get to the point where we've had the Keefe Auditorium Commission look into things, they've honed in on the numbers a little bit more, that we know what it's going to cost. Maybe it's more than the $10 million, I don't know. Maybe it's less. But if we get to a point where it's just not gonna be feasible, I don't think that there's a developer out there that would say, well, you know, you guys are stuck with the Keefe, like, you know, like, you should have thought about that. Like, I'm pretty sure they'll go in and demolish it and take it. So, but the point is that my point is, we will not be able to go down this road and explore really what we can do unless we are very clear that we want to keep that auditorium and we want to explore different ways to keep it. So I would suggest that we keep with the amendment that I have in front of us.
Mr. Chairman, if I may?
Yes, of course.
Thank you. So I just want to say for the record, I think everyone here is doing an amazing job teasing out all the nuances and details and some of the, and really exploring some of the nooks and crannies to arrive at a decision that I think will be good for the city in the long run. One issue that I haven't heard brought up this evening yet tonight that I just want to put on the table for you all to think about is there's been some suggestions of capital campaign for preservation of the Keefe Auditorium. And so really thinking through, one, whether there's a dedicated group that can actually do that, and two, whether you may or may not be cannibalizing the other arts groups, and particularly the Performing Arts Center. And so understanding and being sure that you're aware of at least some of these things, so you can make an informed decision, is all the point that I wanted to raise right now. I would suggest, as Alderman Clemens has outlined, the plan that gets ultimately adopted, if this body moves in that direction, should have a capital campaign component to it. It was something that the Performing Arts Center did. I think, as Alderman Clemens pointed out, there was multiple sources. I think a new market tax credit could be another source as well. But all these things are going to take time to put into place, and nothing is going to happen overnight. I mean, Alderman Clemens and I, Alderman Klee, could tell you the years that we worked to get to a place where we could get to construction. And so I think the community and I think this board needs to be, understanding and realistic of the timeline as well.
Alderman Tebow and then Alderman Jettie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I got 3 questions for you. Well, one's a statement. I guess you probably won't want to do new market tax credit again.
No.
But my 3 questions. So the first one, how would this function with the ad hoc committee that you guys got now? So obviously it kind of makes it messy, I would assume, because it's got to be something that's got to be done, within the next couple of years, at least starting. That's going to mess up your $30 million a year, right? How would things get bumped down? Because obviously we heard from Director McCormick today, and I'm concerned about some of the things. So that's my first question.
Okay, so again, and this is the most important point that I leave with you this evening. $30 million of new debt authorization year over year. Ultimately, other projects will get bumped down because of the decision that you're making now. And I'm going to say you're only, potentially making a $10 million-ish commitment, but you're making a $10-ish million commitment that needs to be factored in over the next 5 years. Whether you do more than that, that's probably additional study is necessary. But what I think you'd see happen is moving forward, we would pencil that in one of the outer years, and just be owning and recognizing that that is, what we're committing to or talking about. And that conversation may mean it's $30 million based on how this unfolds. and that's fine too, but then you have to look at all the other projects, and what you shouldn't do is have these conversations in isolation, but look at all your other needs, think about your wants, and then decide what it is that you can realistically afford.
Second question, thank you. And I'm glad I brought you to your most important point, so that was good. So we get this property this year. How much tax money are we losing per year as if nothing shows up there? Potential tax money.
It really depends on the development plan. So you tell me, how many units you're willing to accept on the site, right? I mean, and then I could be able to better tell you what the potential taxes are going to be. Obviously, the more units on the site, the more taxes you will get. Right now, we get nothing, 0. So,
Did any of your planning involve, when you had the Keefe in place, what was the maximum units you were envisioning?
so I think you could safely plan 300 units on the site. at
What's the
mid-
rough estimate for
mid-rise.
taxes on that?
And I don't want to be held to any of this.
No, just a ballpark.
Yeah, can I get a calculator?
You want a drum roll too?
Yeah. So,
If we raise taxes, that number will go up, right?
correct. Let's be clear, the tax rate,
I never expected that to come out of your
Yeah,
mouth.
do not say that,
Daddy.
please.
Of all people around here, the most conservative member. I'm getting glares over here.
bear with me here.
Sure.
Okay, so we'll say 300 units. Divided by the mill. What's a tax rate you want to use?
Whatever we got now.
Okay. We'll just say $23 to keep it even.
Okay.
And I'm using 300 units at market rate. You'd be looking at about $1.2 million-ish.
Okay.
But I think some of that 300 units would be at an affordable value assessment. And so whatever that number of units is, we would have to reduce the potential taxes, probably a few $100,000. So for this conversation, I'm gonna say, you're safely in a range of between 800 and $1 million, and then you could see a little bit more depending on the affordability.
And my last question?
Of course.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. So my last question is, Alderman Clee kind of mentioned, she was going to send a letter. That's one person, right? So, to the federal or the state delegation. Is that something we should explore? I assume we're grant writers, or we're asking our grant writer to, or we would look into maybe getting some federal stuff, federal funding. There's got to be something out there for the arts that we could use. I know you probably exhausted everything for the Performing Arts Center, but there's money every year, right?
I think the city, as defined by members of the Board of Aldermen and the volunteer group, wants to go out and explore grants. I would encourage you to look at new market tax credits. I would encourage you to look at historic preservation. All these various sources could be sources that you could look at that could help you.
And I'm sold to pass it tonight, so thank you.
Alderman Jettie, then Alderman Clee, and then Alderman
Yeah,
Govea.
thank you. So if you could please clarify for me, you mentioned $300,000 to $350,000 to continue the utility use of the building.
Can I clarify that? So if you wanted to use the building,
In total.
that would be also more than the utilities. That would include a custodial staff as well and various miscellaneous expenses.
And do you have any estimate on that?
But that's included in the 300
Okay.
say $300,000 approximately.
Okay, and then you mentioned 10 million to mothball the building. So if you didn't use the building, it would cost 10 million to mothball it? Is,
When the rest of the structure gets torn down. So when you separate the structure and preserve just the keef, you're gonna need to spend some money creating a non-combustible, closing in the wall, weatherizing the building. You're gonna need to spend some money to provide water service and other utilities to maintain the mechanical systems that will ultimately maintain the heat and the water for the fire suppression.
Okay.
And so that is, doing that work would be around $10 million.
okay, but we could continue to use the building for somewhere more than 300,000, around that number. And so I've read recently that the symphony is no longer going to use the keef. And do you know why?
In speaking with the symphony, it's my understanding that they are exploring options, and they have, and as I understand it, recognize that the high schools may be an option. It might not be their preferred choice, and I certainly can't speak for them. But in our conversations, they seem to represent that it was feasible for them to be using the high schools. I think that they would like to have some more support and assistance when they are using the schools, like making sure that classrooms are accessible. There's, an overall willingness to be a good community partner with them, and making sure there's adequate green room space and some of these ancillary needs. I think from their perspective, it would go a long way in helping to make it more beneficial. I believe they're exploring other venues across the state. Of course, they are an organization that does perform across the state regularly. And so I think that they would continue exploring whatever it is that they needed to do.
Okay, so it wasn't that they were kicked out? It's their choice to have stopped using the keef?
Correct, but I think maybe to put a more finer point of what you're talking about is, they know inevitably come June or July of this year, the building is going to get turned over to general government. And I should say, for the record, everything that we're talking about here is predicated on the fact that the Board of Education is going to elect to transfer this asset back over to the care and control of the general government here, because that needs to happen. And so I just want to get that on the record. We're kind of acting as though that's a fait accompli. If that all happens, then it comes to within the purview of administrative services, and we have to maintain that facility. And the plan would be to close the site and not use it come the summer.
Okay. And lastly, the 30 million that you mentioned is your rough estimate as to what it would cost to renovate the keef to bring it up to a point where a professional, someone like Spectacle would be willing to take it over and operate it. But something along the lines of what Alderman Clemmons is talking about, we could continue to use the keef for a much smaller number, without doing all of those renovations immediately. Is that fair?
I think, so a couple points, but to answer your question very simply, yes, I think that's fair. I think first and foremost, we want to be clear that that is not quote unquote my estimate, but the estimate that was provided by our consultants. And that's how we arrived at that $30-ish million. I do believe it's fair to say that, and we should be very clear, we are not talking to Spectacle unilaterally and going to hand this to them. I would, if so charged, put an RFP out, and I hope Spectacle would respond to that in terms of being an operator, and then we would have a business conversation with them. They are a wonderful operator. I want to speak very highly of them, but I would not want to be focused solely on Spectacle. I think that's unfair to do. But then thirdly, I believe Spectacle or any other sophisticated operator would prefer us to make some of the improvements outlined in that $30-ish million budget, but would it be a non-starter if it didn't happen? No. My understanding is because the seating count is as high as it is, could the operator bring in on a case-by-case basis some of the audiovisual equipment or whatever the more elective type things that occur? The seating count is at a high enough where the ticket price could support those rentals as opposed to it being provided. And so some of those details would need to be worked out, but it goes to your point, is it fair to make the assessment? I think it would be.
Okay, thank you.
Before I move on, so I have Alderman Clee, Alderman GOV, and Alderman Clemmons. You're good? Oh, I thought, then, but what's the value, Director Cummings, of the acreage?
Just the land, you're saying?
Like, what is it, like, what, I know they can bid based on the design, oh, we're gonna give you $1, but we'll do X, Y, and Z, but like, what's the actual fair market value of that much acreage in this city?
I mean, again, it depends on how you're using it. And to be clear, we've never, and it's actually very specifically not written in this resolution, suggesting that we're going to try to do what's called the highest and best use of the land. I think we should recognize as a community very early on that we're not trying to achieve the highest and best usage of the land. I say that to you because, you know, I think that would shift some of the community goals I've heard expressed. And so that's explicitly left out of this resolution. To answer your question on what I think the value could be, I mean, on raw land for this, you're probably talking $250,000 to $300,000 per acre.
Because my thought, you know, you could reduce the purchase price, and if they contribute towards that 10 million, while they're tearing down that part of the building, type of conversation.
I think if you so elect to want to preserve the keef, that would be one of the sources that you may want to identify in the plan.
Does it need to be identified in this amendment for you to do that?
I wouldn't want you to do that at this time, because what inevitably, and for those of you who may not know, is after you do the RFP process, then you kind of pivot towards developing the contract. And that contract is typically referred to as a development agreement. It's essentially a purchase and sale, but you know, it lays out the conditions and the mitigation that may be expected to actually get comfortable to actually transferring the asset. And so you'd kind of do that during that phase of the project.
And one of the reasons I bring it up, because you know, you hear 10 million, 30 million, there are ways to mitigate costs that happen outside the public realm when you're going through these confidential biddings. Does that mean it will be 10 million? No, it could be less, it could be more, but there are ways to mitigate the cost and have the developer pick up the cost.
I think,
Oh, no, I just want to also say again, as I'm kind of teasing out some other points that I think everyone should be cognizant of, is I'm assuming there's a level of understanding of all the capital needs that are out there in the city. So that it's a public document, we've provided it, it's in the CIP, but there's also, it was brought up at the last ad hoc committee, but there's a lot of capital needs out there. So you should be just cognizant of all the other projects as you continue on with this conversation.
Yeah, we don't have a bucket full of money that we just throw at everything. Alderman Clee.
thank you. First, there was a question that I did not ask before. You talked about mid-rise, that was the plan. How many floors is that?
I would say 4.
4 floors, okay. What is the School Street right now?
3,
I mean-
I believe 3.
That's only 3, so you're talking about going 1 floor above this. So all the homes that are around it will be looking at that okay, I just wanted to tease that out, so,
Oh, hold on.
Oh, I'm sorry.
the School Street.
Oh, I'm sorry, I was thinking of the Elm Street Middle School. So no, School Street's 7.
Seven,
School
okay,
Street's
good.
7.
So you're talking
Yeah.
about coming down 3 feet from, 3 floors from that.
Yes.
Okay, so just so that.
As well as
general-
not have podium parking.
Right, so, yeah, it would be more like 4 floors then down
And,
potentially.
and then also there's an 8-foot grade change from, I know the School Street lot, there's an 8-foot grade change from one end of the building to the other end of the
Right.
building, which needs to be taken into consideration.
And the Elm Street School right now, you said is how many?
The Elm Street?
Right, the school.
I believe it's 3.
3, so we're only talking 1 floor above what they're looking at right now.
Again, to qualify the typology of the mid-rise.
Right, to talk about that, I just, so that the general public would know how high or low anything would be. So if we're building, surrounding it, this is what they will be looking at, just maybe 1 floor above what they're looking at right now. Okay, the other comment that I want to make is that, and I've been hearing it here in the conversations happening, we make deals all the time. I know the School Street Flats, as it's been called, there was lots of deals, including a TIF that came out of that, and we did the TIF so that we had the parking, we did the TIF so that we could do West Pearl. So we do make deals and work things. The Mohawk Tannery, we've done all kinds of things, including, and a mistake that I made when I heard that they were building the bridge to Mine Falls was that they were building the bridge, paying for the bridge, et cetera, out of the kindness. But that's not the case. They're building the bridge and we're paying for it later on. So these are just some of the things that I want to get out there in the public, is that deals are made all the time, good or bad, however they feel about it. So that's why I think that moving forward, we could potentially make deals on this. I also want to address a comment that was made about the historic preservation. And please, anybody correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think if we went and tried to get this preserved on a historical basis, that is going to mean all 9 acres become historically. Do we have to not zone this off first? So we can just, this one building, we can preserve historically
Correct.
and not affect, okay. So
Yep.
I was given misinformation that if we went in to try to historically preserve it, then we were tainting the rest of the land. So we could just preserve that. Oh my God, I love that. And the next question I have, if you don't mind, is the city selling or leasing the land?
Great question. If I may, I mean, the intention would be to sell.
Okay,
But I think and this is a great point that Alderman Jetty kind of teased upon a few moments ago. As the deal evolves, when we started out on the School Street project, we were selling. And then as further design and as the deal came together, it turned into a long-term lease.
right.
And that's okay, but that's inevitably what happened. But I'm going to suggest that the RFP is going to be written in a way where we're looking to sell and transfer the 9 acres. Ms. Chairman, may I, when the time is appropriate, add a comment or two?
Alderman Clee, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I have 2 more points that I wanted.
2 more points, and
Yes,
then
if you don't
if
mind.
Your time is yielded to director.
I never yield
So-
time. Come on. Do you just meet me?
I was motioning to Alderman Clemmons.
Okay. I want to add to what Director Cummings had mentioned about as we go on, when we do the RFP, we put it out there, and then as we're negotiating, and our negotiations with Spectacle is a perfect example of it. They came in, they bid, they told us what they would want to do and so on. We accepted their bid, and then we started negotiating who would get what and so on, and who would be responsible for what. So that kind of went evolved. So again, that's common in this. So just because the RFP says, looks like this is the way it's going to go, as you're evolving and you get their ultimate bid as being what you think is going to be good. And I think it was even when it came to the Performing Arts Center. And I did want to make one more comment. To the best of my knowledge, the largest donors, and I could be wrong, of the symphony reside right here in Nashua. And as far as the letter to the federal delegation, the reason that I sent that, as are all of the arts groups throughout the city are doing, is because Representative Custer and Senator Shaheen put out a call for those who are interested in projects for 2025. 2025 will begin in October, not our 2025, which is in June. So many letters are going out, and the call needs to happen by, I think it's Thursday. So I know lots of letters are going out. And I did send letters to both Senator Shaheen and Representative Custer, asking to consider federal dollars and federal support for the Keefe. Whether or not it'll go on deaf ears, I don't know. I did not represent the Board of Aldermen, nor did I represent the city. It's not on letterhead, it's just on a plane. But I did say that I had been a 3-term New Hampshire state representative and working on a 4-term alderman here in the city, and the importance of saving. So for those in the public, you can reach out to myself or the chair of the Arts Commission and so on. But there is a strong push for it. There is a strong working towards getting everything. And I think organizations would work on capital. As far as cannibalizing, I think there's enough people out there that want to save the Keefe and that they would look towards that. But it's just a guesstimate on my part. I do not have anybody's commitment, so. Okay, I'll stop talking again.
I will eventually probably get the question to actually be voted on, because we are at 2 hours and we have other legislation. So I'd like members to keep that in mind. Doesn't mean I'm not going to call on you, but Director Cummings.
Thank you. I wanted to suggest that maybe you think about furthering the amendment offered with some additional language that maybe stresses or prioritizes alternative funding sources beyond just the general fund debt service should be prioritized in the plan as outlined. I wouldn't hamstring it with a number or anything like that. I think that needs to be a further discussion along the way. But what I'm trying to do is minimize this $30 million year-over-year impact. Oh, is that in
It's
the
in the
line?
amendment. It's the last
It
paragraph.
says a capital campaign.
But
That's what it's-
but putting an emphasis on other alternative sources of funds should be prioritized, a commitment should be given that we're gonna not just try to achieve these things, but capital campaign, grants, whatever the case may be, that helps alleviate some of, because some of the burden that I think, I'm trying to take off of the general fund.
I think that was
Alderman
paragraph.
Forgive me, but I do believe that the last paragraph does address that. It says further resolved that it is the goal of the city to develop a plan to mitigate any costs associated with maintaining and upgrading the Keefe Auditorium using similar methods used to mitigate costs associated with the National Performing Arts Center, including but not limited to a tax increment finance district encompassing the Elm Street redevelopment site, grant funding, federal funding, a capital campaign, tax credits, and a professional management agreement. And it does say including debt service payments on any related bond. So what else would you like to add to that?
Verbiage.
I mean, I'm just looking at this for the first time this evening, but maybe inserting prioritizes, and I'm just kind of doing this out loud right now. Further resolve that is the goal of the city to develop a plan to mitigate and prioritizes, maybe somewhere in there.
Okay.
The idea being is you'll try to develop alternative sources beyond just looking at the general fund's debt service to help execute the plan, and it really just to kind of emphasize the priority that should be made on these alternative funding sources.
So, Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry.
Of course.
Just to, so would you like it to say further resolve that it is the goal of the city to develop a plan to prioritize and mitigate?
Yep.
All right, I will amend my amendment to that.
That's, you want to withdraw then or?
No.
So,
Amendment.
no, I'll
Amend the
amend
amendment?
amendment
Okay.
number 2 with that,
Okay, thank you.
yeah.
All right. Alderman Jettie.
Thank you. So, as we have zeroed in kind of on this, possibly adopting Alderman Clemens's amendment, and then possibly adopting the proposed resolution that has been presented to us. I didn't want to lose sight of comments that were made by Alderman, or former Alderman, now Representative Plamunda, tonight, and were expressed when we went through the study last year. Was it last year or the year before? Sometime.
Yes.
The idea of, I'm sensitive to what he says about this. This is in the heart of, of downtown, near the heart of downtown, I should probably say. But, and certainly in the heart of Ward 6. And I'm concerned that, that we end up with, the land, being full to the maximum of apartments or condos or whatever it turns out to be. And then, like what happened in, off of Bridge Street. You've got all these buildings, you've got all these people, and there's no place, for them to go. There's no place, I'm thinking especially of the kids. So what do you say to that, that concern about, where the people who live there, where are they going to be able to recreate?
I was going to make an amendment proposal after this one that asked for consideration of green space, community space in the development. But I'll let Director Cummings answer that question because I also wanted to make sure it was codified.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So let's see here. So again, first and foremost, the less development you have on the site, the trade-off is going to be less tax revenue, and you're going to be, trading off the ability to maybe do some things that you'd like to do, including maybe preserve the keef. That's just depending on how much green space you want to preserve or whatever the case may be on that front. So again, that's something to be aware of. I think through the engagement that we did, we had an architect on site. We, solicited the community. Mid-rise construction was where it, seemed to fall, with the idea that there would be some green space on site, but not overly dramatic or really trying to tease out what is in your mind as adequate green space. Because we have site plan regulations that we will need to follow. We have our general concepts that we've outlined. Ultimately, Alderman Jetty, to answer your question, a lot of this is market driven. And a developer will know their market, and they will know the type of amenities that they're going to need to put on site that will help make their development successful. So you may not have seen in the 1980s dog runs being as popular as they are now, and if anyone who's doing new apartment construction now, they're thinking about pets, because more often than not, dog and pet ownership actually outranks maybe having children. And so accommodating that value that their residents have is where they're focusing their efforts in building out their development. So I think we want to be cognizant that we want to work with a sophisticated developer that is going to provide the amenities that would be appropriate for the community that they're building out. And so I guess I'll leave my comments there, but it doesn't necessarily need to be quote unquote green space as, I think traditionally conceived.
Okay, thank you.
All right. No more questions. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Director Sullivan hasn't had an opportunity yet. and he's come out.
My wife said that this was going to be a long meeting, and I said, no, we'll be done by 9. And I was completely wrong.
I'm happy to contribute some thoughts if the committee would indulge me.
Of course.
And certainly Director Cummings invited me up, so I think I wouldn't be doing him justice if I didn't make a few comments. Largely, I think what I'll say to the committee this evening is a summary of several comments made. I'd be remiss to not begin with the conversation that the ad hoc committee is having around capital spending and debt service, and I know that that's been top of mind this evening. And I'm certainly aware that the action this evening in no way obligates the city to $30 million of debt. Perhaps it obligates it to 10, but that question will be answered at a later time. So I won't talk about the indebtedness. What I do have concern about, and this is just sort of I don't want to say it's the planner in me, but what I do have concern about is perhaps born out of that, and that is the fact that a substantial effort was put in, led by Director Cummings, and I'd like to believe later supplemented by all of your efforts and certainly efforts of other staff, to identify a variety of development concepts for this site. And the maintenance of the Keefe by itself and combined with the existing historic school were no question identified as possible redevelopment options. But there were other redevelopment options as well that did not maintain the Keefe and in a way turned the site into a blank canvas of redevelopment opportunity that was intended to include, of course, a variety of different things. Mixed use, possibly, mid to low high density residential development, green space was clearly articulated, and yes, arts and culture were also articulated as part of that study work. But in the end, at least my feeling was that study itself would ultimately drive the RFP process and the solicitation of redevelopment proposals for the site. And so my concern this evening is not, again, about necessarily the carrying cost or the long-term debt of the Keefe or the financials of making a tax increment work to finance the improvements to the Keefe itself, but it's instead this idea of taking some of the development concepts off of the table by making these amendments. And, again, I'm here to provide my advice to the board and provide an opinion in some cases, as I know Director Cummings and Director Hannum are. My concern comes from the idea that we will not see any redevelopment proposals that sort of rely on some creative work to perhaps, yes, get rid of the Keefe, but perhaps create a higher quality development product on the site that's reflective of those priorities that were identified within the study work itself. And so I think that any amendment that were proposed this evening, whether it be the Keefe or for something else, even green space or affordable housing, I am of the belief to some extent that we should let the folks that are submitting give us their best shot, and we should then work with them to negotiate a master development agreement that articulates that. But I also respect the authority of the board and of this committee and of Alderman Clemmons and the amendment that's being proposed. And so, we will work with what this committee does, but, I'll say this now, I do expect that we're going to be coming back to express some concern about the viability of a redevelopment on the site. That's my opinion only. I don't want to represent anyone else's. I have concerns about the idea of balancing all of these things on one property, green space above and beyond the 35% that's required under the zoning, a mid-rise housing development that provides up to 200 housing units and provides an affordability level that is a pull in its own way on the financial viability of doing a redevelopment at the site, and the loading on of the improvements to the Keefe. My only comment is, I hope this works, and I'm here to help you all, and I know that Director Cummings is, and Director Hannum is as well, but I'm nervous about how successful we're going to be. But that said, we take our marching orders from this committee, and so I hope that I'm wrong, and I hope that we're able to figure this out and preserve this facility as part of the RFP that's done. But we'll see if we're back to request for further guidance from you as part of a subsequent RFP process. And again, I hope I'm wrong, but I greatly appreciate you hearing my comments this evening based on the discussion.
I'll tell you what, I won't push it with another amendment on green space. I'll just keep it at 35%. At least you walk away and say you got something.
Well, at 35%, I will just say for that piece, Alderman Murray, I mean, the zoning that's in place could change, and so I want to be really clear about that. I wouldn't push back on any amendments, because I'm not going to push back on, obviously, on the Keefe amendment nor the affordable housing one. If you felt inclined to do an amendment on green space, my only recommendation would be to maintain the existing 35% requirement or go above and beyond that. But again, I would be careful there, because any additional requirement may potentially cut into the redevelopment of the property, and we're just adding additional constraint to an RFP that may already be constrained.
After hearing you, I won't add additional things.
And I'll keep my comments short if I may, Mr. Chairman, but
Yes.
you're seeing developers come up with alternative type ways to satisfy a condition like that, like community gardens on roofs, right? So that, we understand the value. I think we can get there and achieve some of the goals that we've heard, and it doesn't need to be as previously conceived as to a very sterile, X amount of percentage on the plot of land is going to be dedicated or set aside as open space.
That makes sense to me. All right. Will the clerk please call the roll?
And I just want to be clear that we're voting on the amendment, the second amendment.
The first or the second?
The second.
The second.
Second, we already did the first, that passed 5-0. We're doing the second one now, and that includes the adding the language, prioritize and mitigate any costs that were added on this. So by roll call, Alderman Moran,
Yes.
Alderman Govea,
No.
Alderman Clemmons,
Yes.
Alderman Jettie,
Yes.
and Alderman Tebow votes yes. It passes 4-1.
Now the motion before us is for final passage. Alderman Tebow.
I just got one comment before we vote on this. So, a lot of good speaking tonight about this, a lot of good comments, a lot of good thoughts. Some of it's a bummer, as I think in a perfect world, we'd keep the Keefe and have great space there and have great buildings and take all kinds of tax money in and go to all kinds of shows, right? I think President Kennedy said, we don't do things because they're easy, we do things because they're hard, right? And this is one of those times when, in order to keep this, we gotta make Director Hannum, Director Sullivan, Director Cummings work just a little bit harder. But we all have to work harder, right? And I think the community and the people that want to keep the Keefe, we have to find ways to do that. It's above us, right? And it's all of us working together at the same time. If we want to keep something that's a great asset to this city, we gotta do the hard thing. And we gotta find the money, we gotta find ways to do it. I think we all gotta come together for this. It's not gonna be one person or one thing or one letter or one this or one that. It's gonna be all of us trying to find ways, and it could be even the developer, to find innovative ways. I shook my head when Director Sullivan said, we may come back and not be able to find anybody that fits this stuff. And, but we gotta try. And so the first step is to try, right, and see what we get. I'm glad that Alderman Moran dropped his green space, only because, how many things are we gonna put on this? We're really, next thing will be those dog lanes, and we'll never get somebody coming in here, right? So, I asked the community and the leaders of the city to step up, and let's find ways to keep this thing and not cost the taxpayers extra money, and not keep the library from getting its money that it needs, and all the other things that are gonna be on that ad hoc committee that you're doing. So that's my thought out there for us, and the ability to keep this property and still make it worthwhile for the city and the surrounding community. Thank you.
Thank you. And I do apologize, I called the row. I meant to call for a voice vote, but I'll do that correctly this time around.
So what do you want on this one?
The motion is for final passage. All those in favor say aye.
Roll call.
That late hour, I can't get any breaks. All right,
All right.
will the clerk please call the roll?
Yeah, Alderman Moran,
Yes.
Alderman Govea,
No.
Alderman Clemmons,
Yes.
Alderman Jettie,
Yes.
Alderman Tebow votes yes. That's 4-1. It passes.
Favorably recommended.
Favorably recommended for
Favorably
final passage.
recommended.
All right. New business ordinances.
All right, I'd like to make a motion for final passage of O-24-003 by establishing a fee for parking spaces utilized for extended outdoor dining.
All right, so, before we start, Director Ham, I had spoken to Director Cummings early this morning, and I had mentioned it briefly to Alderman Clemmons. I like everyone here, frequent downtown, and I have lunch there frequently, and
Yeah.
I was at a local restaurant, and I got I'm not so sure from a prominent restaurant that there's two of them side by side.
Mr. Chair, could
oh.
you keep your voice up?
Oh, I'm
I'm
sorry.
hearing the people leaving, and
My apologies, Alderman Jettie. And I got concerned that they had said no one from the city had spoken to them regarding tonight's legislation. And I explained it. I said it's going to be, $500 just like last year, et cetera. And I don't know if I want to commit to that. Which is, that's their business. But my thought came to what happens when not enough people commit to it and traffic patterns get disrupted, and does it become feasible? What do you think? What's the other flavors of other restaurants? I've talked to Casey McGee's. Matt didn't know this is coming as well, but he's all on board with this all the time.
Right.
He thinks it's great for his business.
Yeah. Yeah, so we've had a couple of conversations. I have probably commitments from 6 different restaurants that they would like to do this again.
Mm-hmm.
And then I have 2 restaurants that have said, no, they don't want to do it.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't utilize them last year very well. So it's kind of a mixed bag, but the legislation for the actual barriers has been approved through this year.
Mm-hmm.
So it's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And we're working with City Engineer Hudson to make sure that traffic patterns are not disrupted. So I think the idea is that people would like to go forward with this.
Mm-hmm.
I pulled some data for you from our new software, the Placer AI. And during last year's dates that it was out, we had 140,000 visits to the barriers.
How many? Could you say that again?
140,000. And we had 73,000 unique visitors. So it looks like they were going just about twice. Frequency is 1.9 is what they're saying. So, it was pretty successful last year, and I think the people that put effort and energy into it did really well last year. And those that didn't put as much effort may not have seen the value in it. So I think it's a mixed bag, but based on what City Engineer Hudson has said is we need to maintain the traffic patterns, so it's not going to change very much. We are going to, as soon as this legislation goes through with the $500, we're going to go out and make sure that we have exactly who's going to do it and who's not, so that we can make sure that those traffic patterns will match up with the flow of traffic and safety issues.
Alderman Clemens, I'm sorry, this is
No, I
for
didn't want
legislation.
to, I just wanted to,
Yeah. Go ahead.
are you sure?
Yeah, I'm going to reframe my thoughts in my head.
Okay. So I had a discussion, and this committee, the Finance Committee and this committee had a discussion relative to the fees last year. And it came up in Finance because when the paving schedule came out, originally last year, the paving for Main Street was supposed to start in April and be done by the time the barriers came out. And then the concern was brought up that you don't want to put the heavy concrete on the fresh pavement because it's going to make indent, marks and all that. So they changed it to August. And the problem with that is, or was at the time, was that we had sold to the businesses downtown that they would get, I believe it's through the end of September, the barriers. So we're cutting it a month short. So the idea behind, and I know, so that was discussed at 2 different committees, and then it was also discussed last year, the previous year it was discussed when this first came up that we would adjust the $500 to a higher amount based on the success, based on how many people wanted to do it again. So I don't want anyone to think that that was lost on me at all, because I remember that. But coming from the perspective of we changed the paving program and therefore the time frame got reduced for what the folks were paying for. I felt, especially in a prime season like the coming of fall in September, the end of August, that's a very nice time when people want to be outside, et cetera, et cetera. My thought was leave the fee the same as it was last year. Let's not try to adjust it yet, because we haven't really gotten, and the folks haven't gotten a full year out of it. And let's relook at adjusting the fee the following year. And so that's why I submitted the legislation with the same $500 fee, because I think that out of fairness to the businesses downtown who do want to participate, I thought that given the paving situation last year, that this was the best way forward.
Can I just ask, the legislation that we authorize is until what year?
This is the
This
final
is the
year.
final year.
Yeah.
To Director Hannum, Director Sullivan, is it viable beyond that? I know that's not the discussion regarding the fees, I'm just curious.
Yeah, I would say yes, definitely. We are obviously seeing the numbers. I even pulled some of the data from where the visitors are coming from, and it's up to 50 miles away. So it does seem to be a very successful program for the restaurants. I think the value judgment that we put on Main Street, those who see it as a highway versus a destination don't see the value in it and will fight it continuously. But we need to just decide what our values are, whether we want Main Street to be a highway or a destination, and then move forward with that. And these barriers would go towards our value judgment being that it should be a destination rather than a highway. So that is a value judgment that this body has to make, and we will go forward with whatever, but I do think they're a viable
We're
option.
not making that judgment.
Right, not tonight. No, not tonight. But in the future of this program, that will.
Yeah, if I could, to add on to what Director Hannum's saying is, and I absolutely agree with everything that she just said, I would also recommend that this body really start to pivot and think about permanent infrastructure changes necessary. The best thing about extended outdoor dining was it was proof of concept. Up until, a few years ago, it was absolutely, we could never do this. Well, here we are a few years later. Guess what? It works. And the data and the engineers have even said it works. And so I would encourage you all to start thinking about how to maybe plan and design for permanent infrastructure changes that what Director Hannum said, which is to start thinking of our Main Street not as a highway but as a destination.
The data that you referenced,
Yeah.
Where is it posted anywhere?
It is not posted yet. So I pulled it this afternoon, just for those dates, just for this particular meeting. I can certainly post it in anywhere on the ECDev page maybe. But this is through the Placer AI, the new software system that we just provided. So
How does it measure?
so it's GPS data in your cell phone. So it counts people that have been in a location for more than 7 minutes. So we might catch, sometimes we would catch an employee, maybe like a server that number. So that's a generalized number. 140,000 is about the right number, but taken with a grain of salt because it's anyone over 7 minutes.
And does it break it down utilization by daytime, all that stuff?
Yep. So I've got kind of daytime
This is why
hours.
what is it called? My Navita stock is like through the roof. It's taking over.
Yeah, yeah. I've got household income, home location. I've got where they went before and after the top 5 destinations, and actually the Center for the Arts is the top destination after outdoor dining, with these particular dates. And then I've got travel routes, so and then we've got
I'm
times
sorry
of day.
that I just
and-
keep hammering and not giving anyone else a turn.
Kids'
but,
first names.
Yeah.
But is it generated daily, weekly, monthly?
So it is live data. There's a 3-day lag though. So, but we can pick any dates that we'd like. We can say last year. I put the data in for May 1st through August 30th, which was when the barriers were out. So that's just the data from there. But we can pick and we can create our own kind of polygons. So I put one around the library so that she knew her, there's 1,000 people a day that go through there. That's how we picked that number, was because we had this new software system.
Was there any public-facing ability to use that software for anyone?
No, so it is subscription only, and we pay a good amount of money for this. However, I am sharing the data with the small businesses in the downtown.
Okay.
So that they can use this to make real-time staffing decisions, things like that.
How frequently do you share that with them?
I'm trying to do it every Friday, but I haven't quite gotten on that schedule yet. So twice a month so far.
But we are adhering to our contractual agreements with Placer AI.
Yes, we are. We are not sharing the data publicly regularly. Yes.
And Director Sullivan, you had...
I just wanted to take the opportunity to grandstand for a second, because that's what I love to do. But every time we talk about outdoor dining, expanding outdoor dining downtown, it brings me back to a conversation that was had 2 years ago about renewing the program. That was a tough conversation, no question about it. But I think you'll remember there was sort of a shift in the way that we talked about this and conceived of it. I'm probably understating the toughness of it, but suppressing pain. But I think you remember that we sort of shifted the basis at that time from COVID response very actively towards this idea of this proof of concept for public realm expansion on Main Street. And that was on the heels of the master plan and a variety of public feedback that we collected as part of COVID response. And you all know that we're actively working on this. Downtown circulation study that was recently adopted actively considered and studied the idea of a permanent dieting of Main Street in some configuration. We know that the concept can work. We're demonstrating it every year. And so the future is a bit unknown. We recognize that beyond this authorization into next year. But we're going to be coming back with something in some form, unless we're able to secure some level of federal funding or other funding to actually go under construction for Main Street. And we're actively working on that too. We recently submitted a RAISE grant to USDOT. We're hoping our second try is successful. But we're also in the process of looking for other funds, and I just wanted to quickly mention something else maybe of interest. Congressionally directed spending had come up earlier this evening, Alderwoman Clee, that you mentioned, and I think this is just, I find this important to say. As much as you're having a conversation about all the capital and debt that the city might take on over this part of this $30 million program, there's another exercise that goes on sort of parallel to that. And that is that the city also submits congressionally directed spending requests for consideration through our delegation. And we generally base those requests almost exclusively on what the articulated priorities are of this body and of course of the mayor as one of our guiding lights as well. To the extent that the ad hoc process will inform that, we're really looking forward to having some more guidance as to what we should be submitting as priorities to the federal delegation. Whether that is, and I think particularly this reminds me of a conversation that was had at the ad hoc committee. Congressionally directed spending is sort of an unknown, but it's an opportunity for us that really will be important for some of these projects that are tougher to fund maybe in the traditional sense, but are really, really important to the community, whether it's the Keefe, Main Street, or other things like that. So I want to point out that requests that go in, there's not a self-cannibalization that happens, but you are sort of competing potentially against yourself if you're submitting other requests. So that's just something to keep in mind when we write letters of support. And then the last thing I just wanted to say is, ignoring the fee for just a moment, there's been some sort of discussion of design modifications that might happen. I want to be really clear about what that means. Every year we go through a process of at least contacting the other agencies involved and asking them whether there were issues that arose, whether there was traffic issues, whether there were specific restaurants that asked for certain things. We're going through that process right now, and so I want to be clear that the design plan hasn't been finalized. We start from the plan that worked or that was used last year and try to make as minor tweaks as possible, but we have paving and other things that happen and parking needs, and so you may see a slightly different configuration. And we're happy to share that with you once it's actually finalized, but we're not including it as part of this legislation because that's an ongoing process that we're working on.
I think just to add quickly to that is, we have not gotten a firm commitment from the restaurants yet, whether or not they're interested, because we don't know what the fee is gonna be yet. So this legislation will help us, help them make that determination. So that's, once we get this fee confirmed, then we can do a full outreach program.
And then I was a skeptic of utilization until you pull out the data there, and if we could accept it too and have Donna post it as part of the record. But, you know, when Big Brother is watching everything, you can't escape it, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, this is the same cell phone data that like Google Maps uses, so it's.
I always make him chuckle every.
Yeah.
He gets tired and worn down.
Yeah. But
My apologies for cutting you off. Alderman GOV.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At first, looking it over, my concern was, is it high enough? But I think you bring up a really good point with the paving schedule last year, and I do remember that conversation in finance. So, yeah, I think that does kind of keep us whole with the business community downtown and kind of holds up our end of the bargain here. So I do want to see them eventually go higher, but I'm perfectly fine if we keep it at 500 for another year and then revisit.
Alderman Tebow, then Clee, then Alderman Jettie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So first off, I think you got to post that somewhere because you're going to get a right to know tomorrow.
oh yeah,
I can guarantee you that.
happy to share.
So I think the 500 for this year is fine because I think like, you know, we want to keep to what we said. My question though is, you know, I thought it was great. I thought that the traffic pattern last year was really good compared to, you know, that first year. And I think it cleared up a lot of problems. I drive up and down that constantly because I'm here all the time. And during rush hour, not during rush hour, it was fine. I thought it was good. You know, once we took the barriers down, I saw 2 accidents on Main Street. So I thought it did the exact job that we wanted it to do. My question is though, like, it seemed lively. Why are there restaurants that, I mean, $500, it may be a lot to a lot of people, but a business that can make that off a couple of people, especially one that's making money, why is $500 like a deal breaker for some people? And again, I don't want to raise it this year, but you're saying that some people, and there's been some talk about maybe some restaurants not utilizing it, that were, you said, kind of a primary restaurant, wouldn't want to use that $500. I think that's kind of weird to me, because I think you can make that back in a couple of patrons, and then you're done for the whole year, and you're bringing in money.
Yeah.
Sounds like.
What were the reasons?
I can speak to that a little bit, yeah. Some of them, so for example, Jaja Bells didn't use hers, but
would
that's
make
because
sense.
it wasn't in front of her business because of the way that the configuration of the.
That one I
So
understand.
she couldn't see. But I think the people that aren't using them to their full advantages are not or table service kind of locations. So they're just putting out chairs, and it doesn't matter if they sit there or if they walk away, or, you know, so they're not utilizing it as a as a revenue source, the same way that, say, Surf or the table service style businesses are using. So I think that that's probably the difference.
But you were at one.
I was at O'Brien's and
Oh, yeah.
Oddfellows.
Yep.
Was he one of the?
Yeah, so they did do table service, but I think that they're in the process of figuring out their business model right now. Yeah,
I'm confident that was the message I got.
yeah, yeah.
Alderman Jettie, then Clemens, then Clee.
So thank you. So when you said 140,000 visits, are you talking about people who went and sat at a table in the street? In the
Yeah,
park?
and again, that we have to couch it in, it only catches the people that are there for 7 minutes or longer. So we might catch people that were just sitting on the curb next door or in their car, but generally that's a good idea of what the number would be.
Okay.
It pinpoints it to the street.
Yeah.
Where, not just inside the restaurant, which is
Yeah.
great.
Yeah, so I only
Right.
did outside the sidewalks. So I made the polygon so that it was just the street and not
Right.
inclusive of the sidewalk.
Right, so that's what they're paying for, is the ability to put tables in the street, That's not what this fee covers.
Right.
And, you know, to put things in perspective, you know, $500 for 6 months, you know, it works out to be around $20 a weekend. And, you know, my wife and I had dinner the other night at, you know, a new restaurant that just opened. And you know, it cost us, you know, over $100. And this was, you know, we split the appetizer, we split the entree, and we had a couple of drinks, and it was over $100. So I'm thinking, it's not, you know, you don't have to sell very many meals to
Right.
make up this money. So when I hear people balk at the 500, you know, I kind of wonder. You know, Concord charges $1,000 per parking spot. You know, Portsmouth, it comes out to be like $1,500 per parking spot. So, you know, $500 is a deal. I was gonna move to increase it, but, you know, having heard what my fellow aldermen have already said, that they're fine with the 500 for this year, I guess I'm not gonna waste our time by increasing it, unless you think it would be,
So I would say that we have lots of different types of restaurants on Main Street, and some of them it's a pittance, and some of them it's a lot. And so I think that this is a good compromise, that people that are gonna utilize it they're gonna have skin in the game, either way. So I think in the places where it is a minimal amount, they're gonna use it too. So I think that this is probably about right.
so may I continue?
Of course, yeah.
So another way of looking at this is, how much is it costing the city to provide this extra dining space? You know, there's the cost of installing the barriers, but I understand we do that for other reasons in addition to the providing the dining. But we're also losing parking revenue. Do you know how much, you know, what the average per parking spot with the revenue is?
Gosh, it's about $1 an hour, $1.50 an hour.
It's in the legislation, I'm being told, Director?
Oh, yes, it's the
It's a fiscal
fiscal,
note.
yeah,
Fiscal note.
Yeah, in the
fiscal note.
fiscal note.
Right here.
So it is a loss of revenue, which is why I think we charge too. But we have about 3,600 parking spaces in the downtown, and this is about 15 of those parking spaces. So, there are plenty of spaces still available. And I think as we continue to develop, that may not stay the same. So we might not have the same amount of parking going forward, but for now, we have plenty of spots. During our parking study, the highest utilization of any block in the entire downtown was 85%. And so I think we've got plenty of play in there to work with to lose those 15 spots for a few months.
Okay.
And I was going to introduce legislation to increase it, but then we had the finance committee meeting, and then we had, like, they lost time.
Yeah.
Just, you can't say it's this amount of cost, whether you think it's the right amount of cost or not, and then take it away, because they've already paid for that period of time, and it sounds like most folks are agreeable to that. But now with this data, next year,
Yeah.
I can say you are using a lot of space, it's time to pay up.
Yeah. Yeah.
And could I have?
Yes.
So, again, I think that, you know, these, you know, the ability to put tables and chairs in the street is a benefit to these restaurants, especially with, you know, the Center for the Arts attracting more and more people. So this is a great opportunity for them. And it, but I'm, you know, I don't want to belabor the point, but, the people, it's important to me, and I hope you can, work out something with Engineer Hudson, that certainly the intersections can have barriers, that reduce the flow of traffic, into the lanes, the 2 lanes that we want. But for example, between Factory Street and High Street, last year, even though that restaurant on the corner did not participate, there were tables and chairs set out in that space, and people were using them. So, it concerns me that if they're not going to participate, I think we ought to try to come up with some way of making sure that they don't get the advantage of it, and that alternatively, that, the businesses, the retail businesses could benefit from people being able to park there. So I'm thinking of that block in particular, that, people could park in front of, there's a clothing store, there's a.
This might be just the urbanist in me, but activity is great no matter what, right? So I actually enjoyed having people use the spaces even when they weren't attached to a specific restaurant. But I see where you're coming from, definitely. So, yeah.
It could be for public use or something.
Yeah. But the restaurants don't use if they don't.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Sorry, I cut you off, Alderman Jetta. Do you have a follow-up?
No, I think I
Alderman.
made my point, hopefully.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. If you didn't pay for the space, then you should not be using it, and you should be enforcing that. I mean, that's the bottom line, and I hope that would be what we do going forward. But anyway, the bigger point I wanted to make was that, a lot of times we mention, you go out and, I spent $100 on dinner and all of that, but ideally, if a restaurant is doing it right, at the optimal amount of money, they're going to be making $35 off of that transaction. The rest of it is cost. So, and that's if they're hitting all the right numbers and buying everything right, and et cetera, et cetera. Most of the time, it's less than that. So just something to keep in mind, that it's not pure 100% profit when you turn over that bill. Most of it is expenses. So
That's why, yeah, if we could, I know this is another conversation, but you take the potential of profits and maybe turn it into a percentage and then increase it by that percentage.
So
Based-
most restaurants, a good model makes 30% profit. So that's on a good day. Are you looking to potentially increase next year by 30%?
Well, you look at the space, square footage amount, how many tables can go in there, based on the amount of utilization, and then you say, oh, this is what you could make based off your average meal, right? Because everyone should have, like, I have a median, it's called the mixed rate for me, so I know what my mixed rate of a reimbursement is for all insurances combined. They should also do something similar. You can do it with QuickBooks, and say, okay, then out of that, you're making 30%, let's increase it that amount, that percentage, whatever it turns out to be. I'm not saying you take the entire profit either. You're just saying each one of those spaces is worth X amount more now, based on your average meal rate.
Yeah. Okay.
And that math didn't come out great, but I can definitely write it down.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry.
I'm sorry, one other quick thing too. I know that one of the businesses mentioned, I'm also there quite often, actually more than I'd probably like to admit, but anyway. I know the owner pretty well, and he expressed to me that he is on the fence of doing that because they didn't really use it much last year, and it's not that they don't appreciate the program, they do, but sometimes it's staffing. And it depends on how much staff they feel they want to invest in. Do they think that they're getting enough income from the inside? So it's a business decision essentially. And so I think, however, from a sales point of view, from the city's perspective, we should probably want to have those spaces filled as much, and you could probably go back to that business with that data and say, look at how many people utilize your space versus others, and you could potentially be in on this, and if you can sell that to them, a no right now or yesterday might be a yes after we pass this legislation. So I think that, I'm always ever the salesperson. I don't think that a no is necessarily always a no. So,
Alderman Clee, then Alderman Jenny.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First off, I too had wanted to originally increase the price, but after hearing what Alderman Clemens had to say, I would support this on the full board of leaving it as it is. And I do want to add to something that Alderman Jettie had said. Manchester charges $1,000 per space, up to 2 spaces is all that they're allowed, but they have head-in parking, so it's not quite the same that we have with the parallel parking. But having said that, the truth is there were barriers on Factory Street. In my opinion, I don't know why they were there because nobody was using them.
Those were not part of the extended outdoor dining project.
Okay, so I guess
They were construction?
Which is this, to be clear?
On Factory Street, there were barriers there.
They were narrowing barriers.
Yeah,
Correct.
Those were design-based barriers.
Because of the other barriers on Main Street? Okay.
And
I got
to
it.
further, it added parking spaces that
Yes.
technically are
Right.
not on Factory Street.
Right.
So actually what you
Right.
did was create a whole bunch
Yes.
of parking
Okay,
on Factory.
so
Okay,
thank
thank
you
you.
for clarifying that. And to that end of parking spaces, when people lost parking spaces on Main Street, yes, I will hear grumblings on social media that, well, I'm not going downtown because there's no parking spaces. But the truth of the matter was, I saw more cars parking in places that they had never parked before, that are outside. My favorite parking, non-Main Street parking, is the taxi cab stand. One of my favorite places, I park there to go to the art center. I park there to go to my dentist. And I started not having any parking spaces there because everybody else started using them. So they do find alternatives. Parking spaces. So the loss on Main Street, where Main Street is a higher rate, I don't think it's going to be dollar for dollar because I think some of those people are going to be moving to another place and actually may find that that's a better space because even when Main Street opened, guess what? Those parking lots were still filled because they were cheaper and they weren't that far to walk. So I just want to make that very, very clear. And Placer AI, I get goosebumps and excited about hearing all of that. I know the public is out there going, I'm putting my phone on airplane mode so no one can catch me. Right? People can catch me anymore doing it.
Director Ham has all your data.
But it's not just the city of Nashua. Everybody knows everything that everybody does. But the information that we've been able to get for the Performing Arts Center has been amazing. Learning how far people are going, and I know that's not part of this conversation, but to know they're coming from Maine and they're coming from Rhode Island and so on. It's very exciting data. I mean, it truly is.
One of the cool things about this one, and I'll probably have to give you this one too, but only 47% of the people that were out in the outdoor extended dining were from Nashua, had a zip code in Nashua.
Wow.
So that means that more than 50% of people are coming from other communities, and it's Hudson and Merrimack and Hollis, but there's also Goffstown and Pelham in the top 10, and then we have up to 50 miles. So it's pretty exciting to see that we are attracting people from outside of our community.
Was that different area code? Is it, or is it?
Yes, it's by area code. So
Because
the
I
top,
still have my Lowell
oh,
zip code, and I've been here for over a decade, so people are averse to change sometimes, because you can't
No,
sometimes get a
it's not-
zip.
it's
I'm
not-
sorry, not
it's zip
zip,
code.
area
it's-
code.
Yeah, it's not area code,
It's zip code, okay,
Yes.
all right.
Yep.
Yeah.
So it's
I-
the
They're
top
gonna have a
four-
handful of people from Lowell being tracked.
No,
down.
that was the same question that I had asked, was it area code or zip code? Because
Yeah.
I wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, I don't want to
because
perpetrate a stigma
my-
of us people from Lowell.
My sister-in-law, who lived in Massachusetts, has a Massachusetts zip code while she lives now in Connecticut. So I did ask that question.
Yep.
I want to kind of bring this back to when we originally started the barriers during COVID and so on. We've made a lot of changes since then. We've really gotten a lot. And it was proof of concept, yes, but it was to also show that we could and should narrow Main Street. I mean, if I had my way, we'd get rid of that doggone centerpiece. We would only have one lane going both directions, and we'd have head-in parking with a barrier that would allow bike path and so on. I've got it all developed in my head if anybody's interested, but I don't
We're done.
suggest
There we go.
I don't suggest anybody going inside my head, because it's a very dangerous place. There are holes everywhere. Anyways, but I really do think this is proof of concept of how we can change our Main Street, not just the ad and dining. And it's also giving us, working towards making the veterans, the memorial, working it so that it actually brings us behind the downtown, brings us to the parking garages, which we are working on. It is bringing alternate routes, and on the other side, talking about whether or not we change Spring Street to bi-directional. If we change Temple Street in a different way, it's getting us to talk outside of the Main Street, so we can make Main Street a destination and make the alternate routes, the ways of getting to the hospital, or the ways to getting across town and so on. And as a person from Ward 3, I hear all the time, if you do this, I'm gonna lose my route to the hospital, the fastest route possible. And to that, I would say, not true. If we design Main Street properly, I think the traffic would continue. And one thing I've learned from the group that came for the E-code and that week was that just because we slow traffic down doesn't mean we have less cars going through. We actually can get as much volume through in a slower pace, because people aren't trying to get around everybody and trying to create accidents. And I think it makes us safer downtown. And if you speak to the people, they want bike lanes, they want more walking mobility in our downtown. I've heard people say, cut downtown completely, Main Street completely off and just put a giant parkway. That, to me, would not work, but anyway, so the long and the short of it is, getting back to the $500, I think we do need to increase it, but not necessarily this year. But if we go forward, if the Board of Aldermen says this is gonna become permanent, we really do have to look at 4 digits. I truly think so. And maybe it'll be larger businesses have to pay more. Smaller businesses like Joanne's and Euro and those, they're only open till 2 o'clock. Do they pay for the full thing? Well, yeah, because they're using the space, but no, because they don't have the same hours, and so on. So, conversation for another day. Thank you.
Alderman Tebow?
Yeah, I'd like to move the question, please.
All right, that motion is in order. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? The ayes have it. The motion is for final approval. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? The ayes have it. Tabled in committee.
There is none.
General discussion? Public comment? Oh, no one stuck around. Remarks by Alderman. Alderman Tebow?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to, I don't know if it's congratulate's the right word, but outside of my basketball team, congratulations to me and my son. Director Sullivan and his department last week did and Alderman Clee alluded to it, the Recoding Vision Week, which I thought was a good week. I went to a bunch of different venues and saw Sam and some of the other planning staff over the course of the week. And this is a topic for probably a discussion for another time that I can talk to you personally about, is how do we think it did? And so this, again, I'm just making remarks, but how do we think it did? I didn't see as many people out to the events that I went to, which I would have liked to see more, but I did see a lot of good ideas on the board for the tree streets and for that part of Amherst Street. So I thought the people that came in, the consultants were good, and I thought, you know, the stuff I went to was good. I ended the week with the historical walk with Scott and the other 8 people that came. And, it was good, but I was hoping for more involvement by the stakeholders. And I saw a lot of the people that we always see, a few aldermen. I saw Alderman GOV, Alderman Clee, some of the reverends that have the housing stuff in mind. We're at some of these things, but I would have liked to see more, some of the stakeholders. But thank you for that, and thank your staff. I thought they did an outstanding job doing the work they did, so thank you.
Any further comments? All right, seeing none. Alderman Govea.
Move to adjourn.
That motion is in order. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? The ayes have it. We are adjourned at 9:59 PM.